the sensing. It was way back in '58 when I first met Nancy Old Nan Mangrove. My father had been transferred from Fort Knox, Kentucky, to the military base at Houma, Louisiana. It was only natural that the locals would give the new kid on the block a hard time, a sort of initiation test to see if I was worthy of joining their gang. But after my dad's really stupid and unthinkable act, he had made it quite impossible. He had grabbed Zami out of the back window of the '52 Chevy and tossed him at me. "Don't you think you're a little old to still be playing with this? You'll be turning 9 next fall." "Thanks a lot, Dad," I exclaimed sarcastically as I turned to face the jeers and snide remarks from the small crowd that sat upon the curb. They had gathered, not too unlike flies upon a steaming turd, to watch the new neighbors moving into the old 2-story wooden building. "Hoo hoo!" shouted one, placing a thumb in his mouth. "Big guy still sleeps with his teddy." "Bet he still pees his bed at night," laughed another, slapping his knee. "Thanks a lot, Dad," I repeated, walking past him into the building. "Just like you promised, Houma is going to be a great place for me to grow up. Especially now. I sure hope your next transfer is real soon." "That was a pretty nasty thing to do, Rick," chided my mother. I had listened to the rest of the conversation from my second-story bedroom window. "The boy needs to toughen up, Allie. Hell, at his age I was out hunting raccoon, not reading all that science mixin' junk they print in these days. Science fiction. It's good for a developing mind. Stimulates the imagination. Boy needs to get his feet on the ground and keep 'em there." "I'm pretty sure you must have imagined yourself a real Davy Crockett when you were out hunting." "I guess so," said Dad, smiling proudly. "Well, that was your way of imagining things. Not much difference from what you begrudge Theodore. At least Davy Crockett was a real person, not some hokey space ranger from a Saturday matinee. And look at all those pictures he hangs on his wall. Even you say that they give you the heebie-jeebies. That makes no difference. The fact remains that a fertile imagination is a good thing. If you try to suppress the mind instead of stimulating it, you'll end up with a zombie for a son. I guess that should make you real happy. Why on earth would you say a thing like that? Because then at least he'll make good military material, obeying everything without question. Just the sort the Army likes using for cannon fodder. If that's the way you feel about the Army, how come you married me in the first place?" Mom always knew the right things to say when my dad was irritated. "Because you looked so dashing and handsome in your uniform." She had clutched onto his arm tightly, and still do. They had kissed and laughed. "Maybe I'd better see if I can cheer Buck Rogers up," said my dad. A minute later, he was in my room, handing me some loose change. "I think I saw a soda shop down on the corner. Go get yourself a malt." I was busy scanning the magazine rack at the front of the shop when Jake Dresskill walked in. He must have been at least 2 years my senior. I tensed as he approached. "You're the new guy? The one whose dad bought the old Monroe mansion?" "Mansion? More like a shipwreck." "Huh. We just all call it that 'cause it's so old. My ma says it's got style. Built by some French fella who later moved to New Orleans. I suppose you're gonna tell me it's haunted or something." "Nah, but it is kinda creepy looking. I think it's neat. We only renting it. My dad never stays too long in one place. His job is forever moving him around. You like scary things?" "Yep, I see you do too." He pointed at the magazine in my hand. "I'm Theodore Stone. Jake Dresskill. My dad owns the bait shop on 5th and Main. Mine's a lieutenant in the Army. Jim Preston's dad is also stationed at the base. He's a staff sergeant or something." Lucky guy. At least he doesn't have to salute his dad when he comes home. Ha! You got comic books? A few. Want to swap? We usually do that on Saturdays at the Bijou before the show, but I was hoping to get a look at your place from inside. We're still moving in, but make a turn tomorrow afternoon. I'll make sure I got the comic books unpacked by then. Swell! Ted, you've got a visitor, shouted my mom from the front porch. Come on up, Jake, I shouted. We spent the rest of the afternoon swapping comics and chatting about horror movies. We had had a long, heated debate as to whether Lugosi or Karloff was the better actor. After returning from the bathroom, I found Jake and Zami missing. Dad, of course, was happy. You should be pleased, knowing that your friends also still want to play with dolls. Just let it be. I was devastated. Zami was no ordinary teddy bear. He possessed an essence that is common to many toys, nostalgic value. Mom had bought him for me when I was a tender 5. Zami and I had put 4 great and important years behind us. We had comforted each other through many dark nights and clung to each other when that darkness was shattered by the flashing and crash of terrible thunderstorms. We had confided in each other our darkest secrets. Everything that I knew, Zami knew, and vice versa. Even when Mom was unable to understand me, Zami did. He was more than some comfort blanket. He was my best friend. Hell, he was my only friend. When your father is constantly being shifted around the country, it becomes difficult to make and keep friends. Apart from my folks, Zami had been the only constant in my life. So, even though he was worn from the caresses and hugs of love, he had always appeared mighty grand to me. Sure, he no longer shared my bed. To please my dad, I had moved him from my pillow and given him a special place seated on the top of my toy chest. Somehow, I just could not bring myself to place him inside with the rest of the collection, and I still had the odd habit of speaking to him. Mom told me that she knew a boy who had gotten so into the habit of stepping over the cracks in the sidewalk that he continued to do it when he was a man of 40. Step on a crack, break your mother's back, he told her, and meant it. I guess that sometimes a habit is hard to break. Still, it should have been my decision to quit, not made by some thief who pretended to be my friend. I saw Jake a couple of times on the street, but he was quick to avoid me. School was starting in a couple of weeks. Needless to say, I was not looking forward to it, but it would give me the opportunity to confront him. It was, instead, Jake and his big pal Jim Preston that confronted me. I recognized him as one of the loud-mouthed gang that had gathered on the curb the day we had arrived in Huma. Jim was literally big. He was not too bright. He had failed 7th grade and been forced to pass all his old mates on their way to high school in the morning. It must have been a constant irritation and embarrassment to him. To this end, he had decided to relieve his frustration on the new kid in town. Much to Jake's pleasure, on the very first day of school, Jim bloodied my nose. The second day showed no improvement when Jim swiped my milk money. The third day was the worst. The bell had rung announcing the end of the school day, and I was heading down the long corridor to the lockers to collect my stuff. I noticed a crowd around the locker that had been allocated to me. The gathering was the result of what Jake and Jim had placed on the steel door. It was Zami. They had hung him by his neck using a length of wire. "Look, everyone!" shouted Jim. "Here comes the bedwetter now." "Have you been able to sleep properly since I took your teddy bear?" pouted Jake sarcastically. "Does your mama still have to leave the light on till you fall asleep?" The crowd giggled and guffawed. "Oh, I get it," I said, smiling. You play this silly joke on all the new kids. I removed Zombie from the wire. Very clever idea for someone with your IQ. What? Said Jim, grimacing, a confused yet angry frown. Here, I said, tossing the bear at him. He caught it with both hands. You'd better put him back wherever you keep him. Besides, he suits you far better than me. The crowd roared with laughter as Jim stood, red-faced, holding Zombie. He threw the bear at my feet. That's a lie, shouted Jake. You know I took it from your bedroom. Yeah, sure. And when would that have been? When, stuttered Jake. Even though he had done it with an ulterior motive, I knew that Jake would not want anybody else to know that he had befriended me for a short time. That would cause his status as Big Jim's right-hand man to be seriously damaged. Jake looked at Jim questioningly, who suddenly turned and stormed off. I took my time opening my locker and collecting my stuff. When the corridor was finally deserted, I quickly slipped Zombie inside my satchel and headed out towards the back exit. If I guessed right, Jim and Jake would be waiting for me somewhere along the road to my house. And by last sight, they would not be in the best of moods. I would have to find some alternative route back home. During recess, I remembered seeing some of the older boys slipping through a hole in the back fence on the far side of the football field. I surmised that they had some sort of secret spot just beyond, where they could puff a fag on the sly. I climbed through the hole and followed a narrow, worn pathway through some thick shrub that opened into a small circular clearing. I smiled to myself, commending my great detective brain, as I gazed down at the vast assortment of butts that lay scattered about on the damp earth. The path continued once more on the other side of the clearing, and I proceeded to follow it. I hadn't gone all that far when I noticed that the ground on either side of the pathway began to fall away into scattered pools of water. Another 100 yards, and I came across an old sign that read, "Danger, alligators, proceed at own risk." I looked ahead and noticed that the pathway snaked precariously into the swampy wetlands. I decided that it would be best to turn back. As I reached the clearing, Jake Dreskel stepped out from behind some brush. "Thought you could escape us that way?" He smiled. I decided to try my luck with the alligators, but found my way blocked by Jim Preston. "Thought you were very clever making a fool of me," he growled, grabbing my satchel. Moments later, he was shoving Zombie in my face. "Now why you suppose you put this in your bag if it don't belong to you?" "Give him back," I said, reaching forward. A sharp shove from Jim saw me sprawled in the mud. "I'll give him back to you all right," he shouted, with an almost insane gleam in his eye. "Piece by piece." He plucked at one of the black eyes and ripped it free from the bear's head. "Zombie!" I shouted, jumping to my feet. "Here!" shouted Jim, throwing the eye at me and then proceeding to rip out the remaining orb. "And here," he said, throwing it into the mud. "What I'm doing to your precious teddy is nothing compared to what I'm going to do to you." Then he ripped off the head and started to pull out the stuffing. He was still throwing wads of cotton at me when my foot landed squarely in his groin. He collapsed to his knees. In a flash, I managed to recover Zombie's head and torso. I shoved them into the satchel and bolted off towards the swampland. I only stopped to look back once I reached the alligator sign. For a while it seemed as though they had chosen not to pursue me, but then I heard their voices swiftly approaching. "I'm gonna get you stoned. I'm gonna beat you to a pulp," shouted Jim. "This is the only way back," added Jake. "You gotta come this way sooner or later, and we'll be waiting." "If the gators don't have you for supper, I will." "And if the gators don't get you, I hope Mad Nan will." That old witch will make stew out of you. Ha! Ha! Perhaps Jake was lying. Perhaps there was another way back to solid ground further in. The swamp suddenly seemed very inviting. There may be unknown danger ahead, I reasoned, but behind was the very certainty of a painful beating. As I moved deeper into the swampland, the path became narrower and the water wider, deeper and darker. At times I could make out the vast expanse of a bayou through the trees, but the path continued to run a parallel course some distance away from the large, open waterway. The mind has a strange way of playing tricks, especially when you have the overactive imagination of a 9-year-old. Soon, every half-submerged log was a razor-toothed horror. Twirled creepers became coiled, deadly, venomous serpents. Spanish moss was the web of some monstrous arachnid that waited to pounce the moment I let down my guard. I was beginning to wonder if my mother had been wrong about stimulating a child's developing mind when the path broadened into a large dry patch of land. I heard a high-pitched squeaking honk above me. The lack of trees showed a bright, clear blue sky as some black-feathered waterfowl flew directly over my head. I felt a sense of relief, but it was very short-lived as I approached the rectangular stone tablet that was planted in the center of the clearing. On the large weathered gravestone was simply engraved, Lucas, 1839 to 1869. I did a quick bit of arithmetic. 30, I said to myself. That's kinda young. I was wondering what could have been the cause of death when I saw the lotus flower lying at the base of the old stone. How did you get here? I asked, lifting it up and giving it a sniff. It had a pleasant enough aroma. The bloom was covered with large water droplets and appeared freshly picked. I replaced the flower and continued along the path, which now passed through some thick shrubbery. On the other side was an even larger area of open dry land. In the center stood a small log cabin, smoke wafting gently from its clay chimney. For a moment I felt relief, but then Jake's words began to echo in my brain. And if the gators don't get you, I hope Mad Nan will. That old witch will make stew out of you. Probably just said that to scare me, I said loudly to myself. No such thing as witches. Ya sure about dat, said a cracked voice behind me. I wheeled to see an old black woman approaching. The words crone or hag would be more appropriate to describe her. Somebody been tellin' tales about old Nan? Her hair was long, snow-white, and reached halfway down her back. It contrasted greatly against her dark, wrinkled face. The left eye had a milky cataract that pronounced her somewhat foreboding appearance. Under her right arm, she clasped a large bundle of kindling. In her left hand, she clutched tightly to the oversized feet of one of those black-feathered waterfowl that I had recently seen flying above the clearing. Each time she spoke, revealed a row of uneven and rotted yellow-brown teeth. Needless to say, she was a rather unsettling sight to gaze upon. Are you mad, Nan? I asked, gulping. Mad? She queried, scrunching up the right side of her face. I likes to tink self as being a little eccentric, maybe. Not mad. That be like insinuating insanity. Sorry, I never... What's your name, Sonny? She walked off towards the cabin. The bird, that I had thought to be dead, suddenly raised its head to stare at me. It had eyes the color of blood. Cat got your tongue? Theodore, I said, starting to following her. Theodore Stone. There was a small fire burning in front of the cabin. She threw on some of the wood that she was carrying and gestured towards an old wooden stump. Sit yourself down. Not often did old Nancy Mangrove gets herself a veester, especially such a young'un. Are you? I asked. as I reluctantly sat down. What? Before I knew it, the words kind of found their way out of my mouth. A witch? She threw her head back and cackled through those terrible teeth. I suddenly had an image of her cabin being constructed from all sorts of candies, cakes, and other delicious goodies. She stopped laughing and moved towards a brown-splattered stump. I flinched as I noticed the axe stuck in the log. "You see a broom about?" she asked, pulling the axe free. I shook my head nervously. "Or black cat?" She waved the axe about. "Or big cauldron for cooking curious critters like yourself?" "Nope," I said, feeling my twisted nerves tighten even more. A moment later, she brought the axe down, and a severed head fell near my feet. I watched in horror as the creature's beak moved in some macabre, silent plea for help. The crone proceeded to twist some wire around the bird's tail feathers before hanging it on a post. "Gotta make sure it bleeds good and dry, otherwise the meat gets spoiled." She hobbled over and eased herself into an old rocker opposite me. The small fire separated us. "When do you know it's ready?" I noticed that the bird's feet were still twitching as well. "When it fall away from the feathers. Only then it be ready for eatin'." "You!" I exclaimed, scrunching up my face. "Yep, you gotta wait till she's ripe. Much too fresh to be eaten now." She reached inside a large pocket on the front of her dress and pulled out a corn cob pipe. After using a twig from the fire to light up, she asked, "So, why you's askin'?" I hesitated before saying, "If you're a witch?" She nodded slowly. "You need to be puttin' a hoodoo on someone? Voodoo? Hoodoo. You uses the voodoo to place the hoodoo. It be like a curse, only worse." "What sort of curse?" "Oh, like making dat ingrown toenail pain someone awful." "That ain't so bad." "You ever had an ingrown nail, boy?" "Nah." "Ooh, it'd be worse than a toothache." "Wow, that bad?" She smiled, and I felt my twisted nerves starting to unwind at last. I smiled myself as I surveyed the clutter that surrounded her home. "You may not have a broom, but this place could sure use one." "No, thank you very much." Ol' Nan, she like tings as day is. Everything in its place, just where Ah puts it. "I must remember to tell my mom that one," I said, laughing too loudly. "Uh-huh. So what brings you to Ol' Nan Den?" "Nothing. I was just exploring the swamp. Didn't even know you lived here." "You a brave young'un, exploring the swamp all by your lonesome. Ah, thought maybe it'd be something else that brought yous here." "Oh, like what?" "Like maybe a couple of nasty bullies from your school." "How?" "Nan know a ting or two," she said, pointing the narrow part of her pipe at her cloudy retina. "She may be old, but her ears and eyes still work real good. Why not tell her the whole story?" When I had finished, she knocked the spent tobacco from her pipe before replacing it in the large pocket. She added some more kindling to the fire before saying, "Now dat be the strangest coincidence. Did you be knowin' dat a very first teddy bear be named after our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt? Really, God's honest truth. Wow. You want to be showing me the little critter?" "My ma might be able to fix him up," I said, removing Zami's remains from the satchel and handing them over to Nan. "But the eyes are gone. I don't think I'll be able to find them again." With a serious narrowing of the eyes, Nan slowly turned and studied the pieces in her hands before saying, "Something's gotta die afore dey can be resurrected all anew." Her face scrunched into a gleeful, malicious grin that rekindled my previous state of uneasiness. All anew and even better dan afore. "Really?" I asked apprehensively. "Ol' Nan here will fix this cute fuzzy ting better dan he was afore dose swamp rats a got a hold o' him," What you called a little critter den. Zombie! Ooh! She exclaimed, smiling again. Those uneven rows of rotted teeth. Zombie! Dat be the God-given perfect name for him. How's a little fella like you come to give him such a dark moniker? Zombie, not zombie. Close now. I'll do just fine. You leave the mare with me and I'll fix him real good for yer. Really? Sure. Only I'll be needing yous to be fetching me some special items. Items? Ingredients might be a better word. I guess you'll be wanting a needle and thread? Nah. Twists and spins my own special thread, boy. Uses a spinning wheel my grandpappy made. You spin your own cotton? Not cotton. Alligator innards. Stronger than any fish line you'll buy in a store. Calls it gator gut. Does a lot of sewing, you knows. Making raggedy clothes for my voodoo dolls and, of course, stitching dem mouths shut on my shrunken head collection. Don't want dem mouthin' off any curses against old Nan, now do we? She cackled gleefully. I didn't know if she was for real or just putting me on. You ain't got no shrunken heads. Wanna see? Sure, I answered, excited yet disbelievingly. Take a look inside, she pointed over her shoulder. I stood up and moved cautiously to the cabin door. My heart almost stopped as an enormous ginger cat suddenly exited. He paused, and we stood staring at each other. I thought you didn't have a cat. I don't. Nobody ever owned a cat, boy. They too strong-willed to be belonging to anybody. They just be pretending to be belonging. It gets them a free meal and a cozy fireplace. What's her name? Dat be a Tom. He kind of fancied the name Elvis some days and Quincy on others. He got damn good taste in music, that one. How do you know that? 'Cause he be tellin' me. You speak cat? Nah, Elvis. He be speaking 5 languages, including Cajun and the Queen's English. You just funnin' me. Whatever. He sure is big and fat. I stroked his bushy fur. He arched his back in approval. And not from catching any swamp rats either. He be a real lazy one. Just likes to feed on old Nan's gumbo. Has developed a palate from a crawfish stew. The cat suddenly wheeled to face Nan and meowed. See, just mentioning it gets him all in a frenzy. Ain't he afraid the alligators might get him, living out here on the bayou and all? No gators in these parts, boy. Dey knows good and well to stay out of old Nan's backyard. Dey sure is afraid of becoming gator gut. Hell, in fact, the only things with any teeth in these parts is the skeeters. Big bugger bugs. Suck a small critter like you dry in no time. I slapped my arm. There was a large red splotch. Ooh, that was a close one. Here. She tossed a small bottle in my direction. Rub dat on yourself afore dem vampires carry yous off. What is it? I asked, popping the cork and smelling at the potent vapor. Oh, just my own brand of moonshine. This one been specially brewed to 80%. Can't smoke my cornpipe after a swig of dat. I'd go off like a skyrocket on a 4th of July. You use this for insect repellent? Sure, only difference is Dada don't puts it on. Puts it in. Puts it on from day inside. Makes my blood all bitter and unpleasant. Once had a foolish skeeter try his luck. Turned him into a firefly. Go on, I said, putting my tongue on the bottle opening. And don't be getting any ideas. That stuff'll kill yous dead afore you hit the ground. She was probably right. The tip of my tongue had gone strangely numb. I rubbed some of the clear liquid on my exposed areas. Then I walked over and poured a drop into the fire. I lost a good deal of my eyebrows. Wow, I exclaimed through the acrid stench of burned hair. Nitroglycerin. Can I keep this? Please, please, please. Not on your life, boy. You tink old Nan want a law banging on her rickety old door when your mama find it? Also, it be making a damn good way to start my fire in the morning. Not much dry kindlin to be found in the swamps, you know. I reluctantly returned the bottle and watched disappointedly as she placed it in the large pocket before asking, "What else can you do with a hoodoo?" "Turn your enemies into a zombie. Make 'em your slave." "Wow, can you do that?" "I ain't no voodoo queen, boy. You be playin' with fire, trying to cast them hoodoos. You dancin' with the devil, young'un. You see, it cost to curse or summon, too. Ol' Nick gonna want some retribution for his services. Your soul? Nah, that be old school. Nothin' so drastic anymore. Tends to scare all the prospective clients away. Nowadays, a bit of chicken blood will do fine. Seems like a small price. Not da chicken." I stared at the severed head. It seemed to be staring back. "If you ain't a witch, how come you know so much about it all?" "I reads a lot. Started real young, too. My pappy always used to say, be poisoning my mind with all dat trash." "What sort of trash?" "Oh, tales from the crypt, vault o' horror, haunt o' fear, weird tales and—" "You read that stuff?" I interrupted excitedly. "My dad hates me reading it too. Dat be stimulatin' entertainment fair to mind and to imagination. Good stuff for a growin' boy like yourself." "That's what my mom also says." "Sounds like your mama got a good head on her shoulders." I walked over and picked up the severed head, the eyes still wide open. "What bird is this? I never seen one before." "You must be new to dese parts. Dat be the American coot." "Coot? Sure looks evil with these red eyes. Dem Cajun folks sure loves to be tellin' stories o' the black feathered red-eyed coot. Dey calls it Poule d'eau du diable. Dey say it be the foul o' the debile. Don't stop dem from puttin' it into der gumbo, though. Mind you, I don't blame dem. Dat Poule d'eau be a mighty fine tastin' bird. Make a pleasant change when you gets tired of crab boil. You sees dat red spot on the forehead?" There was a large crimson dot between the eyes. I poked a finger at it. "Dat where old Nick put his sharp-nailed red finger to mark them as his own." Nan laughed as I pulled my finger away sharply. "Dat why you's gotta lop off the head and buries it in holy ground." I remembered the gravestone on the other side of the thick shrubbery. "Is that holy ground back there by the grave?" The question instantly removed the smile from her wrinkled face. She stared for some time at the path leading between the thick shrubbery before saying, "I would like to think so, although I believe no man o' da cloth ever be officially consecrating it." She quickly added, "Not them knowledge anyways." I had been hoping to ask if she knew anything about the grave's occupant and the flower, but her apparent uneasiness to my previous query had brought an anxious air upon our so far pleasant exchange. I hoped some humor would help clear it. "I think the eyes are all red from swimming under water too long." Nan smiled, so I added, "The red forehead is from bashing into the riverbed when the water's too muddy to see properly." "Your mama sure's right about dat imagination o' you's," she said, slapping her thigh. She spat into the fire before lifting herself out of the old rocker. "Let's go see what a gots and what a gonna be needin' to be fixin' dat zombie o' you's." She creaked off towards the cabin door. "I thought you said you didn't have a cauldron," I exclaimed, staring at the large boiling pot hanging inside the fireplace. "Oh, dat old ting. I uses it to make some gumbo and to boil the flesh off o' dem gator skulls." "Wow," I said, staring at the long row of alligator skulls that lined a shelf on the far wall. "Tol' yous be having a shrunken head collection." "Swell. Why do you do that?" "Once dey good and dry, I gives dem a few coats of clear varnish and sells dem to Beach and Bayou, that souvenir shop on Main." Dem northerners buys dem up like black treacle sweet cakes. Uses dem for ashtrays and such. Could I have one? I'll pay. You too young to be smoking. Not for an ashtray. It would look really neat on my wall. Could be given used to nightmares some and awful. Nah, I already got posters of Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman up. They scare my mom, though. She says they give her the heebie-jeebies. No poster o' dat Fishman fella? Nah, he's a woozy. Woozy? He swim amongst all dem gators that you be so scared of, boy. I didn't think of that. I'm gonna ask my mom to order me one as soon as possible. Yo, poor mama. Nan moved to the shelf of skulls. After some deliberation, she picked out one and handed it to me. Dis one a tink. Thanks, what I owe you. Just promise old Nan you's not be scarce. Dat you come to visit her real regular like. Kinda fancy your company. It get lonely out here in the swamps by myself. And Oz already heard all what Elvis gotta say. I promise, I said, studying the row of gnarled teeth that protruded from the sides of the skull. Fact is, I like you too. Now ain't dat summin'? Two o' natures rejects findin' pleasure in each other's company. There was a large live chicken in a small birdcage hanging from the ceiling. It clucked frantically as Nan passed beneath it. Hold your tongue, Henry, she chided, knocking against the cage. Not much longer now. She must have noticed the frown on my face. Henry's been a bad boy. Been picking dough out of my bread pan. She pointed to a large wooden chest in the corner. See dat box? The sides had been intricately engraved with images that I expected were based on Greek or Roman mythological characters. Fauns or satyrs, dancing and playing flutes. Mermaids or sirens, combing their hair amongst wave-beaten rocks. Snake-haired gorgons stared with evil reptilian eyes. It once belonged to Red Ned. She waited for a response, so I gave her one. Red Ned? You's heard o' Edward Teach? He better known as Blackbeard, the most bloodthirsty pirate to sail the Spanish Main. But even he was nuttin' compared to the vile Caribbean devil dat was once Eduardo Lafayette. Not only did he have a big red bushy beard, but he also wore a scarlet-hued tunic whenever he went into battle. Some say it was so his men would not get discouraged by the sight of his blood whenever he got to be wounded. Others say it was so none would realize the extent to which he reveled in butchering his victims, his prey. Where did you hear that? She shuffled over to the chest and opened it. After some rummaging about, she proudly raised a fancy embroidered, scarlet-hued tunic towards me. Look, see! Wow, that must be worth a few bucks. She folded the item of clothing over her arm and stroked the front portion affectionately. Dis worth much more to old Nan Dan money can buy. Got some much better plans for dis air garment. It practically saturated with memories. We stared at each other for a while before she continued. Yes, dat will take care of dat just perfectly. Now, let's see what else we be needin'. She returned to her rummaging. Good. Got plenty gator gut and claw. Good. Good. There was a short silence then. Oh, we're gonna need plenty more of dis. She tossed a small ball at me. What is it? I asked, studying the unfamiliar substance. We's gonna need some wax, boy. Not from dem candles your folks be lightin' when the fuse box blow. It be too brittle for purposes. You need to find beeswax. Beeswax is malleable. Malleable? Means yous can bend and shapes it without fear o' it breakin'. Where am I gonna get beeswax? I lamented. She removed her pipe again, refilled it, and then rekindled it with a twig from the fireplace. She closed the chest and sat down on top of it. After some puffing and deliberation, she asked, You allergic? Horrified and staring, I shook my head. No, but is the beeswax really necessary? Can't you use clay or putty or something? Main ingredient, beeswax, she exclaimed, shaking her head whilst staring solemnly at the boiling pot. Now listen carefully, boy. After a few more puffs, she began a 10-minute narrative, explaining to me in minute detail where I could find a hive. The 10 minutes following that was an explanation of how to smoke out the bees without getting stung. The concluding 10 minutes involved the process of collecting and separating the beeswax from the honey so that it would be in its purest form. Then she spat into the fire and said, "Course you can just mosey on down to the pipeline." "The pipeline?" I asked with a sense of relief. "Da store on the corner o' Robert E. and Versailles. Is that where you buy your tobacco?" "Pipeline ain't no tobacco store, boy. It cater for them crazy kids that use them nautical ironing planks." "Now? You mean surfboards?" "Whatever. Just what is it that you're smoking anyway? Smells kind of strange. Not like the rum and maple my granddad uses. I ain't smelled nothing like it before." "Nothin' you's gonna be findin' in any tobacco store. There's just a little somethin' grows in my secret garden. Keeps old Nan bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, just like old Brer Rabbit." After searching about her place, she finally gave me, verbally, a list of the rest of the items she would be needing. "You are mad?" I spat. "Why on earth do you need that to fix Zami? I would rather face a hive of angry bees than try to get that." "Do you enjoy to be shoved around and bullied every single day of your life?" "No, course not. And from your tellin', it sound to my dad it only gonna be getting worse from now on. Do as I asks. Old Nan can help you real good." "How can you—" "Just be doing as I asks," she interrupted, smiling. "Old Nan will make sure that no one mess with yous ever again. You gonna place a hoodoo on them?" "Shush, boy. Yous making the devil's pointy ears all itchy. Just be getting dem items." There was another silent stare between us. "Yous seem like a bright young'un. I'm sure yous can come up with a simple plan o' action. Besides, from what yous already told me, it should be more simple than yous think. Simple, but unavoidably painful." She walked out the door. "You tell Virgil at the pipeline dat old Nan sends her greetings. You surf? Get out of here, jockaboy. And don't be coming back till you's got all that stuff told yous to be getting. Be quick about it, too. Old Nan finds you company invigorating. Feels real perky, like being young again." "Is there another path out of here?" I asked, gazing in the direction from which I had come. "A few, but none that yous will want to be taken." "That's just what I was afraid of," I said, handing her the alligator skull. "Please keep this for me till next time. I'll be waiting safe and sound for yous here with old Nan and Elvis and Henry and Zami. Thanks, Auntie Nan. Just Nan will do. Thank yous. Ain't nobody's Aunt or Uncle Remus. You better hurry now before your folks be sending out a search party." "Sure, Nan," I said, walking back towards the path. I began to sing and whistle a silly song I had just made up. Worse than a curse. Use dat voodoo to place dat hoodoo just like juju. I think I heard Nan laugh. Jim and Jake had been most patient. I arrived home that early evening with a swollen eye and lip. I smiled at the item in my hand and hoped that the pain of obtaining it was worth the effort that I had suffered in gaining one of the ingredients that Nan had requested. I placed the hank of hair, ripped from Jake's head during the scuffle, in the cigar box that I used for all my precious keepsakes. "One down," I said to myself before going to the bathroom to remove my muddied clothes. It was a week before I returned to old Nan with all the ingredients, all bar one. A week of absolute hell. Jake and Jim, it seemed, had now resolved to making my life unbearable. They would taunt and terrorize me during every free minute from their schooling. This meant that I was now forced to arrive late for classes, spend recess in the school library, where I was forbidden to eat my lunch, and was required to run straight home after school. Straight being a relative term, as I had to use different routes that had me crossing through strange backyards. One time I narrowly missed being mauled by an enormous Rottweiler, but twisted my ankle during the escape. This made my daily attempts at evasion all the more difficult. To add insult to injury, my late coming gained me a seat in the detention class, a seat between Jake and Jim. "This is all your fault," hissed Jake under his breath. "We'll get you real good after this," added Jim in an equally serpentine whisper. "If you three continue with your talking," chided Miss Buchanan, who was obviously not pleased at having been allocated detention duty on a Friday afternoon, "you'll find yourselves here again next week." "Why yous not be tellin' your pappy about dem nasties?" asked Nan, placing the items I'd given her onto a deep metal tray. "Surely he can do somethin' about it." "I did," I said dejectedly. "How could he not notice my shiner? He says it's all part of growing up. It'll make me tougher." I made the tone of my voice deeper. "One day when you're a man, you'll look back and be thankful for it. You might hate me now for not doing anything, but you'll come to understand that it is all for the best. Later, you would hate me even more if I interfered. Trust me, what don't kill you makes you stronger." I sat down on the wooden chest. Elvis jumped up next to me. He seemed to sense my emotional state and rubbed against me in sympathy. I stroked back. "The way things are going, I don't think I'm ever going to make it to manhood. It is killing me. I feel half dead already." "Your pappy sound like a military man to him?" she said, studying the items. "You guessed it. Stationed at the base, eh?" "Uh-huh. Military men always think day and day right. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. Custer," I added. She nodded. "Robert E. Good example," she said, pointing at me. "See, even Americans can be wrong. When the Confederacy and the Union went to war, the men on both sides believed they fightin' for the right thing. Our history teacher told us that more Americans died fighting in the Civil War than all the other wars we fought in together. There you go." She suddenly got a vacant stare in her eye, as if reminiscing about some long-gone event in her life. "You teacher right about dat one. It was an awful price to pay for the abolishment of slavery. But even then they still continued to treat us with contempt. Indifference would have been a welcome change for us." "You speak as though you were there?" "What?" she asked, coming out of the trance. "Oh, you knows that not possible, young'un. Just guess a lot of bitterness has been passed down from generation to generation. Why do you stay out here in the swamps by yourself? Don't you have anyone that can take care of you?" "I takes care of himself. Just fine, thank yous. Been here since, longer than I cares to remember. This be my home. This be where I plans to die." "That's so sad," I said, staring at the dark, wrinkled face. "I would never want to die alone. What will happen when you get too old to look after yourself? Don't you have any family?" "All gone a long time ago." "Don't you have any children?" "I never got married. Never saw any use in it. That don't mean, never fell in love. Made my fair share of mistakes." "Aren't you afraid the government might force you to leave here?" "They can't be doing dat. Owns it all. Lock, stock, and gators. Got the deed in Red Ned's chest." "You own a piece of swamp?" "Sure do. My grandpappy bought it a long, long time ago. Only a crazy person want to be purchasing a piece of land in the middle of da swamp," they told him. He just laugh and say he do it because Jemina told him to. And you don't want to be making Jamina fret none. Who was Jamina? Da most powerful voodoo queen in the territory. She was plenty respected by all the peoples. If she placed a hoodoo on summon, it was placed real good. Huh, I laughed, slapping a knee. I don't blame your grandfather for doing what she said. I guess he must have been pretty scared of that Gemina. Not at all. He loved her very deeply. She was his wife. Jamina was your grandmother? Nan nodded. She say the land my grandpappy purchased is special. She say the land contains special powers. This piece of land here? Uh-huh. And does it? Oh, for sure. It don't look very special to me. It's not what one sees. It's what you feel. I don't feel nothing either. Dat because you don't be having da sensing. The sensing. It be like a special connection with nature. Plants, animals, and even the soil. Very few people ever lucky to be born with the sensing. Some may even live and die without knowing they got it. Especially those who are unfortunate enough to live their whole lives in the concrete jungles. So, Gemina had this sensing. That's how she knew the soil was special? Exactly. But the power do much more than that. It also make her a great healer. All the witch doctors around the world, they got the sense in 'em. I mean the real ones. Not the charlatans that just be pretendin', so as ta takes your hard-earned money. Gemina, not only she be genuine, but she also be one of the best. She knowed exactly what to use to cure any or whatever ailment you got. Even an ingrown toenail? There was a hint of a smile before she continued. There wasn't a thing she couldn't cure. From tetanus to short-sightedness, from arthritis to a broken heart. She even had a cure for the common cold. It was prepared from gator gall, fish oil, ground boll weevil larvae, and red root sap. Tasted something awful, but it sure worked. She could even tell her patients what was wrong with them before they told her the symptoms. I spent the rest of the afternoon listening to more tales about Nan's grandmother. I have no idea how much of it was true, but I didn't mind if most of the details had been fabricated. It was still all very intriguing, and certainly most entertaining. It was getting late when I asked, "How long do you think it will be before Zami's ready?" She stared down at the items I had brought. Only sees one hank o' hair here. Thought yous told him there be two bullies bothering yous? It's been pretty impossible to get any of Jim's hair. He keeps it cut real short. I mean really, really short. Any shorter, and the guy would be Yul Brynner. I would have to use a razor to get any of his hair. That's a real pity, boy. Still, if you likes, can proceed without it. I nodded. There's no way I could ever get any of Jim Preston's hair. Nan's eyes seemed to widen and brighten at the mention of the name. Jim Preston, you say? Yeah, big dumb ox of a guy. Frank Preston's boy? I'm not sure. Jake Dreskel once told me Jim's father also worked down at the military base. I think he said Jim's dad was a staff sergeant. That's the one. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to remove a persistent grease stain. It was only now that I noticed she was missing two important digits. Each hand was missing a thumb. Dem Preston's all bad news. Da world would certainly be a better place without Dem. Real pity yous couldn't get any of dat boy's hair. Maybe one day Providence will help you out. Who's Providence? Nan smiled. Providence ain't a who, boy. It mean fate. She scratched her chin. Then again, maybe it is. We sometimes call her Lady Luck. I once read a story that told about these three witches who were called the Fates. They were immortals who decided how long each human being had to live. I can't remember their names, but... Nona, Decima, and Morta, said Nan, almost nonchalantly, whilst tossing a log into the fireplace. Yeah, that was them, I exclaimed in amazement. So, you also know the story? Nona spun the thread of life, Decima measured it, and Morta cut it. Yeah, Morta also chose the way in which the person would die. You like stat methodology stuff? I guess. A lot of it can be silly and boring, but there's some pretty neat stuff as well. I like reading stories about Hercules or Perseus. Your pappy must be happy when he see you don't just read all them comic books. Oh, I actually got quite a few books on my shelf at home. Read them all too. Treasure Island, Moby Dick, Robin Hood, The Three Musketeers, The Invisible Man, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, plenty others too. I've seen most of their movies as well. And which did you find to be better? The books or the movies? I thought for a while before answering. Depends. Kirk Douglas fighting the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues was pretty exciting to watch. But in the movie of War of the Worlds, I found it disappointing that the aliens didn't move around in giant tripod machines like in the book. I got the classics illustrated of that, and that's my favorite to look at. I think tripod machines are pretty neat and creepy. I wonder just what it is why peoples likes to be scared, and they willing to pay good money for it too. Matty Jones, my friend back in Kentucky. His older brother told us that whenever he takes a girl out on a date, he makes sure they go to see a scary movie. The scarier the better. He says it's one sure way to get him to hold real tight onto you. Nan laughed before asking, "What about yous? You got yourself any special female friend?" "You mean like a girlfriend?" "Uh-huh." "Yuck. No thank you. Girls are just plain silly and stupid. Not too long from now, you's gonna be tinkin' real different." "Never. You got no choice, boy. When your body start changin' and dem hormones start bubblin', you're gonna be droolin' and chasin' after the girls, just like's a googly-eyed zombie. It's just all part of the natural way of growing up. Your pappy thought just likes yous when he your age, but if nature never changed his mind, there would be no Theodore Stone around today. Weren't no stork that brought yous into this world." I felt slightly embarrassed and quickly asked, "How come you never married, Nan?" An expression of great pain came over her face. I could even see that her eyes had become quite watery. I immediately regretted having asked the question. She stared into the distance and said, "I was nearly married once. The big handsome beau and, we was on our ways down to the courthouse one sunny Saturday morning. We never had much money, but we still planned to honeymoon down New Orleans way for a short spell. Never happened though. Strange how things never seemed to go quite according to plan. Curiosity had bested my recent concern, so I pried further. What happened?" She gazed silently into the glowing embers near her feet before saying, "Somebody helped to change his mind." There was another uneasy silence before she looked up at me and added, "Permanently? Who? How? What? You were Stan Elvis when it come to curiosity, and we all knows what that do to the cat. Maybe one day I'll be telling yous the whole story. For now, just be letting yous know dat ever since that day, be taking a special interest in the Preston kin." "Jim Preston's family?" "Uh-huh. Yous could say dat we got ourselves some common history." "What sort of history?" "Like, be telling yous. Maybe one day. For now, be tinkin' dat. Perhaps it be more dan the fear of bullies. That brings yous to old Nan. Maybe it's something more powerful." "Providence?" "Yep," smiled Nan. "Dat old lady Luck been looking after me real good all these years. That why, pretty sure you's gonna get what needed to complete old zombie. Anyways, for now, I'll do what can be done. Gives 'em a week to finish the job." "A whole week?" I lamented. "These things can't be rushed. They needs to be done. Delicately, And so it was that I endured yet another week of hell before returning to Nan. Where's my manners? This be already the third time you's comin' to visit old Nan, and she done never offer you sometime in the line o' refreshment. Would you be likin' a cup of tea, Den? She scratched her chin pensively. Only problem is I don't got no milk or sugar. I got no electricity out here, so no icebox to be keepin' things fresh and all. You don't need a refrigerator to keep sugar fresh. In fact, I read somewhere that it's actually a preservative. Oh, that be the truth. A look of great pain filled her features. Once again, she made that strange motion of rubbing her thumbless hands together in an effort to remove some unseen stain. Dat be the fortunate truth. All sorts of things preserved with sugar. Sometimes yous can even preserve memories. It just dat lost my taste for anything sweet a long time ago. Even da smell of sweetness sets my innards all a-turnin'. Prefer my coffee black and bitter now. Yeah, I smiled enthusiastically. Just like a cowboy. That's what my dad always says when he wants a cup. I want coffee like the cowboys used to drink. Make it black, no sugar, and strong enough to float a bullet. Nan smiled. So, how about it? How about what? Brewing up 2 cowboy coffees, partner? She shook her head and turned towards the cabin. This ain't Texas, boy. And Huma ain't Yuma either. You'll be having tea like a southern gentleman. I pouted my disapproval. As Nan went into the cabin, Elvis came plodding out. He must have been sleeping, because he yawned and gave one of those long stretches that only a cat can do, placing his head low whilst arching his backside high into the air. Hi, Elvis. He gave a short meow when he saw me and came over to rub himself against my leg. I rubbed back, and only now noticed that his left ear had a small, semicircular chunk missing. What happened to you, boy? Get too close to one of them gators. I sat down on the stump, and he hopped onto my lap. After some time, Nan reappeared with 2 delicate china cups and a plate of biscuits on a silver tray. It seemed strangely surreal to be served in such fashion in such surroundings. Thought it a special occasion, so decided to be using the good stuff. Had to scratch it out of Red Ned's chest. Special occasion. Actually, every visit yous make to old Nan be a special occasion for her, but today it be one for yous as well. Zami? I asked enthusiastically. Nan nodded, smiling. Where is he? He look even better now than today. Yous mama bought him for yous. Wow, really? Please let me see him. All in good time, young'un, all in good time, she said, moving forward with the tray. Let's first have refreshments. Then she scolded Elvis. Come on, get down. Give the boy a chance to enjoy his tea in peace. Elvis had an almost indignant air about him as he flopped to the ground. He proceeded to sharpen his claws on the log I was sitting on. That's actually Elvis's scratch and post. He sure do love to sharpen his claws on dat piece of old wood. By the extent to which he had already worn away the side of the log, he must have been using it for a long time. A very long time. I gazed up at Nan, who had sat down herself down in the rocker and was sipping gently at the tea. I thought it was about time, so I mustered the courage together to ask the question at last. I hope you don't mind me asking this, but what happened to your hands? Her attempt at a hasty, indifferent response to the query told me that she had known that, sooner or later, it would become a topic of our conversations. She raised her left hand and wiggled her fingers. Use referend, why old Nan look like some strange sort of freak o' nature? Her statement made me feel uneasy, so I gave no physical or verbal response. Realizing my discomfort, she momentarily changed the subject. I baked some herb biscuits, knowing you'd be comin' round again. They might not be sweet like yous kids like dem, but they sure is tasty. I popped a whole one into my mouth and munched. Great, I said, spluttering crumbs. These really are swell. They'd be terrific with my mom's white gravy. Nan spread her fingers in the air. This'er be a genetic defect, dat run in de family. My grandma had it too. You see, sometimes nature decide to take something away from yous, but it give yer something else in its place, something much better. What can be better than having thumbs? I asked, reaching for more biscuits. The power o' the sensin', of course. It'd be like a lifeline to Mama Nature herself. You also have the sensing? I thought yous knew dat. No, you never told me. Well, how you think I'd be able to be fixin' your zombie real special den? It did cross my mind, though. Course it did. You's a bright boy. Can I see him now? You's just like a kid on Christmas Eve. He's the bestest present that I ever got. A real pal, hey? Yeah, that's why it upset me so to see him ripped apart by some idiot rednecks. I think zombie know everything about yous, even your darkest secrets. Yeah, I said louder than before. You know what they say is the sign of a true friend? Nan had an uncanny understanding of my special relationship with Zombie. It be someone that know all there is to be knowin' about yous, but still loves you anyways. Yeah, that's my Zombie, all right. Then I guess yous both waited long enough by now. She reached into the large pocket on the front of her dress and pulled out the repaired Zombie. She held him face out towards me. My first reaction was one of shock and horror, a look that I had obviously failed to conceal from Nan. You don't like him? She asked, sounding more than disappointed. I thought a boy with your interests would appreciate the new look. I stared hard at Zombie. Slowly, but surely it began to register in my brain that this new look was somewhat appealing. In fact, it was almost perfect. Why hadn't I thought of doing something similar to Zombie myself? After all, Mom's always saying that a change is as good as a holiday, but that mostly happens just before I get told my dad's been transferred to another base. Again. Nan had used her homespun gator gut to sew on some alligator parts in rather creative and artistic ways. Zombie's fluffy paws were now equipped with black, razor-sharp claws. Across the mouth area, she had strung a row of gnarled teeth, placing 2 longer ones at the edges so that they appeared menacingly fang-like. The eyes I immediately recognized. 2 large red buttons, taken from Red Ned's blood-hued tunic and cross-stitched into place. The small, hard, stubby black nose was the only thing that remained of Zombie's original face. Nan had also cut a small, semicircular chunk out of his left ear. It gave him a certain look of being well-traveled and battle-wise, something similar to a scar or a pirate's eye patch. Finally, the words burst forth. He looks, wow, swell, great. Actually, he looks flipping fantastic. I knew a few other expletives that were much stronger than flipping, but that was the strongest one that I could think of that could be used safely in adult company. I held him out towards the cat. Look, Elvis, he looks just like you now. The cat stared indifferently at the teddy bear, as if to say, You gotta be kiddin' me. Nan beamed. So you's really be likin' what I done with the little fella, den? I think he looks fantastic, ominous, and yet somehow appealing. Just like those posters on my wall. There was one little thing about Zombie that bothered me. He really looks great, Nan. Except, well, I was wondering if, I don't want to sound ungrateful, but if what? I quickly blurted out. I was just wondering if you could maybe redo the eyes. You don't like them red buttons? The buttons are fine, it's just that, well, I was wondering if you could do a square stitch instead of a cross one. She frowned. He looks dead, just like they draw dead folks in the comic books. They always give them X's for eyes. Nan threw her head back and laughed. You gots it all wrong, young'un. Dose ain't dead eyes. Zombie now be having a special X-ray vision. He just like dat other guy in your comic books. Da one dat can fly so fast. Besides, he not dead anymore. Now he wanna da livin' dead. Resurrected just like in dem zombie movies. Use kids all fancy. She raised her arms and rolled her eyes. But dem ain't real zombies. Real zombies can be controlled. Really? For sure, young'un. Why else be making a zombieless use can manipulates it? Wow, swell. You said it, boy. Ol' Nan here once had enemies too. But showed dem good. They not mess with me no more after dat. You killed them? Why do dat? Den I not be able to reach them no more. There be far worse things dan death, boy. But certainly put to fear of death in 'em. Her good eye glinted young and wild as she laughed. Can he help with my problem now? For sure. Just keeps him close to your bed. You's not even gonna have to tell your old pal your problems no more. He gonna sense them right out. He can read my mind now. Sorta. He feel your pain and discomfort, and he make it right for yous. How? He gonna visit the dreams of da one dat be causing all your distress. It be a slow process, but it work pretty good in the end. Trust me, it always get positive results in the end. How many times have you done this before? Only whenever it become extremely necessary to do so. Dat be not too often, luckily, but definitely never with a teddy bear afore. Couldn't that be a problem? Couldn't it affect the hoodoo somehow? Don't see how. You sure? Cross my heart, young'un. And she did. I picked up Zombie to have a closer scrutiny of my old pal. I guess the eyes are okay. The rest of the body had been well repaired, but I could feel that he was no longer as soft in the middle as he had once been, and the head was now pretty much solid to the touch. What did you put inside his head? I gave it a hard squeeze. Thoughts, she exclaimed, wiggling her fingers in the air. New thoughts and ideas. No, really? None of your beeswax, she replied and laughed. Eh? That's a joke, boy. Because dat exactly what the little critter got in there. He got your beeswax for a brain. It help him to sort out all them strange new thoughts that been buzzing round his furry little head lately. What sort of thoughts? Who knows what teddy bears be tinkin' about? Maybe honey? Maybe picnics? Maybe he tinkin' he glad to be back with you. But really believed that he'd be tinkin' it time to be doing something about them nasties at your school. What's he gonna do? Oh, you'll be surprised how far a little imagination can go. And Zombie dare, with his new brain. He got plenty imagination, enough for both of yous. Maybe they'll accept him now with his new look. He does seem rather scary now. Gee whiz, even my dad might like the new look. I scrunched up the left side of my face. My mom, on the other hand, heebie-jeebies? Exactly. Mom was actually quite accommodating regarding the new look Zombie. If any of these alligator parts start to give off unwanted odors, or even seem to be developing mange or whatever diseases it is that sick reptiles get, I'm turfing the whole lot in the garbage. And that goes for the skull on the wall as well. Have we got an understanding? At least, I don't keep real live snakes in my room like Matthew Jones did back in Fort Knox, and one was even poisonous. Don't get any bright ideas, young man. I asked if we had an understanding. Yes, ma'am. Good. And that was the crux of it. Of course, I never told her about Nan. I said that it was Jake that had made the changes to Zombie. That's why he had stolen him in the first place. He had done it as a joke in the hope of upsetting me, but instead I quite fancied the new look. That night, I shoved the toy chest up against the top of my bed and placed Zombie as close to the pillow as possible. Before going to sleep, I stared at him and said, "It's good to have you back again, Zombie. I really need your help, pal. I don't know how much more of Jake and Jim's bullying I can take. I sure hope Nan was telling the truth that you can help me. I'm saying this because I know for certain that she was lying about something else. She wasn't born without any thumbs. Something happened to them. If she was born that way, then how come she's got those terrible scars on her hands? It was probably some lucid dream state that I'd entered into before falling into a proper deep sleep. But I could almost swear that Zombie had winked at me. That night, I had an even stranger and more vivid dream. Although strange and disturbing, it had still been oddly pleasant. I was moving at great speed down the hill on the street that ran all the way to my school. It was night, and the area was deserted. The buildings around me seemed larger and taller than usual, as if I were viewing them from a very low angle. Also, very peculiar was the fact that the world appeared crimson-hued, akin to looking at it through a sheet of strawberry-colored glass. As I approached the intersection at 5th and Main, Jake Dreskel appeared from around the corner. He gazed down at me from a great height. I was beginning to feel anxious at his seeing me when the expression on his face turned to one of absolute terror. I wanted to look behind me to see what was causing his fear, but I found myself unable to do so. Jake wheeled to flee across the street, but lost his footing at the curb so that he fell painfully onto the tarred surface. He quickly rolled over onto his back and sat up as I moved towards his feet. Only when he started screaming and kicking did I realize that it was I of whom he was so afraid. Twice he connected with my face before I somehow managed to get hold of his shoe. The curious thing about it was that I seemed to be holding onto his shoe with my mouth. A moment later, the shoe had come off, and I was flying through the air. As I hit the ground, the shoe was dislodged from my mouth and hopped once before disappearing into the wide slit of the storm drain. When I looked back towards Jake, he was on his feet again and running down the hill as though his very life depended on it. I gazed up at the apartment windows above the street stores, where lights were starting to flicker on. Jake's screaming had obviously awoken a number of concerned people. An instant later, I found myself in pursuit. He screamed again as he glanced behind to find me rapidly gaining on him. It made no sense why he viewed me with such dread, but I had found the situation extremely exhilarating. I remember laughing loudly, yet somehow the sound that I emitted was more that of a low growl or snarl. At the bottom of the hill, he clambered up the locked school gate, his shirt hooked on the large capital L in the elementary of Houma South Elementary. He was only able to free himself by ripping the shirt. He landed awkwardly on the other side. He must have sprained his right ankle because he proceeded to run with a notable limp towards the football field. I found that I could easily pass between the painted wrought iron bars in order to continue the chase. As I moved towards the center of the large field, it became increasingly darker as the streetlights faded into the distance behind us. Eventually, everything was in total blackness. Only the sound of Jake's screams could be heard. They finally became rather high-pitched and intense before ceasing altogether. I awoke shortly after that with a terrible dryness in my mouth. After stumbling to the bathroom to quench my thirst, I returned to my bed to find that Zombie was missing. I had most probably knocked him onto the floor by accident. I couldn't see him anywhere, and surmised that he had tumbled under the bed. I felt too exhausted to search any further. It would have to wait till morning. In the morning, I opened my eyes to find Zami back on the toy chest. I guessed that my mother had found and replaced him, although now there was something different about him. His golden brown fur had turned dark brown. Only on closer inspection did I notice that he was totally covered in a strange substance. Was this something that Nan had placed inside him and had now leaked out and permeated his coat? He looked terrible, so I decided to wash him. It took several washes before the crimson substance had rinsed out completely. Remembering what my mom had said, I hoped that the water wasn't going to encourage the growth of any mold or mildew that might give rise to any unwanted odors. I needed to make sure that he would dry out safely and rapidly. I placed him on my north-facing windowsill, where I knew he would be exposed to a good deal of sunlight through the day. Then I got ready for school. That day, although it had begun rather strangely, was also to be one of the best that I had experienced in weeks. Both Jake and Jim were not only absent from school, but also from the routes that I had taken to get there and back. I celebrated the fact by perusing the comic books at the corner store. I left only after Pops Papadopoulos complained in his funny accent, "Enough, enough. You kids alla the same. You just read alla my stuff, but you never pay the monies. You go now." I appeased him by buying a title that I had never seen before, but which promised to be highly entertaining. Zami was completely dry by the time I got back home. I used one of my mom's hairbrushes to fluff out his fur before placing him back on the toy chest. "Looks as if Nan is a person of her word after all," I said to Zami, while stretching myself out and starting to page through famous monsters of Filmland. I thought she said it would take some time to work. Not that I'm complaining. There was a picture of Vincent Price in the magazine. I showed it to Zami. "You see this guy? He not only looks great, but he's got the best voice in movies today. Even better than Claude Rains or James Mason. Did you know they used his voice for the Invisible Man in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein? Nah? Well, now you do." The next day found Jim waiting for me at the school gate. "Did you miss me, Stone?" he asked with a sneer. "Where's Jake?" "Not that you really care, but his folks got the police out looking for him." "What?" "You heard right. He never went home last night after visiting late at my place. They were at our place yesterday asking a lot of questions. They think he may have run away from home." "Really?" I exclaimed, repressing a smile. "Yeah, really. But that don't mean you're going to get off any easier from me." He was right. That night, I told Zami my problems in even greater detail and earnestness. Jim was at school the next day, but he appeared pale and upset. To my puzzlement and joy, he had no interest in terrorizing me. It was when I noticed the uneasy buzz amongst the other students that I realized that something was amiss. Lawrence Sewell broke the news to me. "Have you heard about Dreskel?" He seemed unsettled himself. "Jake?" "Uh-huh." I knew something really bad had happened before he said, "They were busy with football practice yesterday afternoon when Guy Summers found his body in that long grass behind the sea field." "He's dead?" I asked a bit too loudly, so that a group of students all turned to look at us. Sewell nodded. "It must have looked pretty bad. Summers is a tough guy, but they had to take him to the hospital because he was shaking so bad. They say it was difficult to see that it was actually Jake." "What?" "They think it was probably a rogue gator that managed to wander too far from the water. A pretty big one as well." He pointed towards the sea field. It was only then that I saw the 3 patrol cars parked out there. There were men with dogs on leashes as well. Nobody's allowed to go near the fields or swamp till they've caught it. It probably happened kinda late, night before last. How'd they figure that out? The school gate gets locked at night, and they found a piece of the shirt he was wearing at the top. He was probably trying to reach the bayou through that hole in the back fence. You know, the one near... I started to run towards the main gate. Hey, where are you going? Home, I shouted over my shoulder. I don't feel too good. I only stopped running once I reached 5th and Main. I bent over double as I regained my breath. I stared at the pickup truck parked on the corner next to the storm drain. There was a man reading a sign on the door of bait and tackle. He cursed under his breath as I approached. Then he stormed off towards the pickup truck. The sign read, "Closed until further notice." The store belonged to Jake's dad. They lived in the apartment directly above. I waited for the pickup to leave before moving towards the storm drain. I stood in the street and looked around to see that no one was watching. I first pretended to tie my shoelace before lying down flat on my stomach and placing my arm inside the wide slit. My hand returned with the one item I was praying not to find. I quickly dropped the shoe back into the drain before sprinting all the way home. My mother met me at the door. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I don't feel too good," I moaned. She was about to place her hand on my forehead, but I retched my breakfast at her feet and started to cry. "Get yourself to bed," she said sympathetically. "I'll phone Dad to ask Captain Mallory to come have a look at you. I hope it wasn't something that I made this morning. I just need to lie down, Mom. I'll be all right in a while." "Don't talk nonsense," she said, moving towards the phone. "I'm getting you a doctor right away." "Please, Mom, I'll be all right." She turned around. "It's just that I heard some terrible news at school." She walked back towards me. "What news?" she asked wide-eyed, and kneeling down next to me. "It's Jake Dreskel." "Jake? That boy who stole Zami and then..." I nodded slowly. "What about him? Has he been bullying you again?" "He's dead. They found his body near the football field yesterday." She covered her mouth with a hand. "They think it was a rogue alligator that killed him. They say he looked pretty bad." "My goodness," she said, standing up. She went to sit at one of the dining table chairs. She was quiet for a while before saying, "I don't blame you for feeling ill. You better get on up to bed." I walked cautiously into my room. I stared at Zami on the toy chest. He seemed to have some sort of perverted grin beneath those large, ruby-colored eyes. "Why?" I said softly. I moved towards him. "Why?" I shouted loudly. "You were only supposed to scare him or something." I picked him up. "I don't know if this is your fault or Nan's, but until I find out, I gotta do something you're not gonna like." Then I did something that almost broke my heart. I put Zami inside my toy chest, making sure that he was right at the bottom, beneath all the other playthings. I had just sat down on the side of my bed when my mother came in. "Are you sure you're going to be fine?" she asked, narrowing her eyes at me. "I just need to rest a while." "I thought I heard you shouting up here." She glanced over at the toy chest. Mothers are irritatingly observant. "Where's that ugly bear thing?" I decided to put him inside." "Reminds you too much of Jake, hey?" I pouted my lips and nodded. "Wonderful. That suits me fine as well. Now try to get some rest. I'll bring you some tea up later. Maybe you'll be feeling better by then." I lay on the bed, mulling the whole incident around in my head. I ran the dream through my head again, and was surprised to find myself smiling. Was this really so terrible? After all, half my problem had been permanently solved. It wasn't long before I fell into a deep sleep. I don't remember what I dreamed, but I do remember hearing a sound like a mouse or a rat scratching and scurrying behind wood paneling. It was late afternoon when my mother woke me with a cup of extra sweet tea and the words, "You won't get any sleep tonight if you don't wake up now." She placed the tea on the toy chest. "Thanks, Mom," I mumbled, gazing up at her through bleary eyes. Before leaving, she said, "Dinner will be ready in about an hour. If you feel well enough, you can join us downstairs. I see you've changed your mind about Zami. Pity." I sat up and turned towards the toy chest. Was my mother playing some sort of sick joke on me? If she was, the only one who found it amusing was Zami. He grinned at me with that perverted smile. My appetite had returned with an uncanny vengeance, so that I was feeling well enough to join my parents at the dinner table. "I don't want you going anywhere near the swamps or bayou," said my mother, slapping a large spoon of mashed potato onto my plate. "You hear me?" I nodded. "Why the hell would they build a school so close to the water anyway?" asked my father. "Language," said my mom, staring at my dad. Then she glared even more intensely at me. "I've always thought it strangely humorous how mothers will attempt to protect you by using the threat of even worse violence. I'll skin you alive. I ever find out you went near the swamps." "The school ain't that close to the water," I said, ignoring the statement. "From what you told me about this morning," said my father, mixing his peas and mash together, "the boy'll be too terrified to go anywhere near there. Dad was wrong." I desperately needed to speak with Nan, but the constant warnings and restrictions given by the police, school, and my parents had made it near impossible. Even the hole in the back fence had been thoroughly wired up. The smokers had been forced to move their recess activity to the back of the gym hall. It was almost a month before I found the nerve to perform my act of defiance. Our school was hosting a home game against a team from Baton Rouge. I worked my way to where the fence had been wired up and waited for an exciting play. While all the spectators were keenly watching the football game, I scrambled over the top and dashed towards the concealing brush. "You lied to me," I shouted. "You killed Jake. They say it was an alligator, but you and I know better. It was Zami. You told me that you don't kill your victims. You said that they're more useful to you alive. You said you just give them an ingrown toenail or something painful." Nan seemed genuinely astounded. "Dead? Jake be dead? Don't play that game with me. You know you killed him with your hoodoo or voodoo or whatever? You should have seen the blood on Zami. It was awful." "Killed, hey?" "Well, Dad surely explained my surprise to mornin' after." "What surprise?" "It was not supposed to happen so quickly. It gets people talking." "What are you talking about?" "Never mind. All I can tell yous now is that Jake was not supposed to die. That should never o happen. Not unless—" She became silent. "Unless what?" "Unless— I didn't think yous had it in ya. Such an innocent-looking young'un." "Had what?" "Such terrible hate. Yous must have hated dat Jake Driscoll summin awful." Her eyes were clear and bright as she glared down at me. "Did you be wishing for Jake to be dead?" "What? Did you wish for Jake to be dead?" "I did, but—" "Were you happy when you got the news?" I dropped my head in shame. "Yes, I suppose I was." "Even more happy Dan shocked?" "Yes," I almost whispered. "Then it was you that be killing him, not me. That's not fair," I said, raising my voice again. "You should have warned me this could happen. If I knew, I would never have brought you that stuff in the first place." I opened my satchel and removed Zami. "Here," I said, handing him over to her. "I can't keep him, and I don't have the heart to burn him either. You keep him from now on." "As yous wish, boy. When you start pining for de little critter, yous be knowin' where to be findin' him. Nan'll keep him sound and safe for yous." I don't think it's his safety I'm worried about. I headed towards the path. Where you's going? I don't know, I shouted. Home, I guess. When will I see yous again, Den? Never, I shouted, wheeling. I never want to see you or Zami again, ever. But yous promised. Yous promised ol' Nan dat yous. I ran off crying before she could finish. As I made my way back through the swamps, it came to my mind that there had been something different about Nan. The thought troubled me all the way home until it finally manifested itself as I entered my room. Of course, I exclaimed loudly to myself. The problem had been staring me right in the face. I had meant this literally, for it suddenly dawned on me that Nan's milky eye had been clear and sparkling. Misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. There are many variations to this statement, but I believe that this particular one was coined by William Shakespeare. It has a rather bittersweet ring of truth to it. If Jim Prescott had ceased to terrorize me on a daily basis, the events that followed, events that would cause consequences that spanned many years into the future, would never have happened. I guess, in some sort of strange, twisted way, I shall be eternally grateful to Jim. Haircut Wednesday, shouted my father, clapping his hands together furiously at the bottom of the stairs. Let's go, Joe. Time to get that mop trimmed. I won't have any ducktail living under my roof. Haircut Wednesday. That was the more common name for Wednesdays in our home. Every Wednesday afternoon, family members of Army personnel were allowed a free visit to the base's barber. Just one of the many perks the Army afforded their employees. My father dropped me outside the military barber and promised to pick me up in an hour. My heart sank as I entered the large rectangular room. Jim Preston was busy getting his hair trimmed by Corporal McKinley. He glared at me from the large mirror in front of the barber chair. Hey, Wiener Stone, he sneered loudly, so that all the other youngsters waiting their turn could hear. Where's your teddy bear? Scared that Mac might shave all his hair off? The staff sergeant, leaning against the wall and sucking on a Lucky Strike between thin taut lips, moved hastily forward and slapped Jim hard on the back of his head. A smack like that would surely have caused my eyes to water. Jim just stared at the man, a look of fearfulness in his eyes. I told you before, boy, it's Corporal McKinley to you, not Mac, spat the staff, pointing a long, spindly finger at Jim's nose. And stop making such a goddamn row. Ah, it's all right, Frank, said McKinley. I don't mind. No, it's not, interrupted the staff. The boy needs to learn respect. If he's going to be a good soldier one day, he better know his ranks. I already know all the ranks, Pa. You taught me real good. After another slap, the staff continued his reprimand. Don't you be talking back to me, boy. You're getting as bad as your ma. Yes, sir, answered Jim sheepishly. He glanced quickly at me again in the mirror. A flush of embarrassment colored his cheeks. Sorry, sir. That's more like it. The staff turned to leer at me. And you? You got something to say as well? No, sir, I answered nervously, almost coming to attention. You Lieutenant Stone's boy? Yes, sir. He studied me slowly, his eyes moving up and down. Figures, he scowled. Sir? Jim told me all about you, and that little teddy bear of yours. He looked around slowly at all the other boys. So, what you doing here? My dad brought me for a haircut, sir. You sure? Sir? I just think you'd look much better with 2 ponytails all tied up with nice pink ribbons. Everyone except Mac laughed. A strong urge to turn and flee from the room gripped me, but I knew that it would only make matters worse. Leave the boy be, said the barber, sensing my pain. Some kids just take longer to grow up is all. Yeah, said the staff loudly. And you want to know why? It's all this commie crap they're feeding into their heads these days. Commie TV programs, commie movies, and worst of all, those damned commie comic books. Stuff should be banned outright. No true American would read that shit. Makes 'em all soft inside. Kills that killer instinct. The Ruskies know well that every man gotta have that killer instinct in order to survive. No son of mine is gonna watch that crap. I ever catch him doing it, I'll take my belt to his hide. No siree, no kin of mine is gonna turn out to be some queer pansy marshmallow. I'll sooner put him down like a sick dog before I let that happen. Next, said Mac, removing the towel from Jim's neck and giving it a hefty flick. It made a loud whack, like a whip being cracked. Bits of hair drifted gently towards the floor. McKinley had a ritual. I had been coming here long enough to know it by now. Between each cut, as he waited for the next person to be seated, he would fetch a broom from the corner and sweep away the last person's hair shavings from around the base of the large, adjustable barber's chair. "I'll do that for you," I said, rushing past Mac and grabbing the broom. "Thanks, Theo," said Mac, smiling. He ruffled my hair. "You're a good kid. It'll give me a chance for a quick puff." He reached for a pack of cigarettes on the large, wide counter in front of the mirror. "That broom suits you real fine, boy," said the staff loudly, whilst grabbing Jim tightly on the back of his neck. Jim winced. "My boy here, you know what suits him? I got him a hunting rifle last spring. You want to know why? 'Cause every real man got hisself a rifle. And one day, Jim here is going to shoot something big and mean." "That's right, Stone," said Jim, sneering. "One day I'm going to bag me a mountain lion or a grizzly. A real live dangerous bear with teeth and claws. Not some silly harmless teddy bear that sleeps next to you each night on your pillow." "That's telling him," smiled Jim's father. "But you'll make your old man even prouder if you take out a bunch of them commie bastards. Just like I did back in '53 in Korea. You ain't lived till you've killed. I'm talking righteous killing. It's like disinfecting a toilet, removing the germs that plague society. I sleep better nights knowing that I did my own small part to make this planet a better place. Some try to use a broom to clean the mess. I always found that my rifle did a much better job." He pushed Jim towards the door and followed. I gazed down at the hair surrounding the chair and smiled. Providence. Nan was more than thrilled to see me again. "It'd been a while, but I knowed yer be keepin' your promise, ta, ol' Nan. You's a good kid, a man of your word." I handed the ball of hair to her. "I need your help, but I don't want any more killing." "Dat gonna depend on yourself, young'un." She held out the hair towards me. "How much you be dislikin' dis Jim fella den?" "Pretty bad, I guess. But I understand now where all his anger and frustration is coming from." She frowned at me. "It's all his dad's fault. He only takes out on me what his dad takes out on him. I dislike Jim, but I also feel sorry for him. But no matter how much I understand or sympathize, it ain't gonna make my problem go away. Sounds to my dad you's be having the perfect disposition for me to be placing one of my hoodoos, boy." "That is exactly what I figured myself." After a short silence, I said, "I missed you, Nan. I don't know why, especially after what happened. It wasn't that I felt sorry for you out here by yourself. I should have hated you, but I found myself actually missing your company. Dat because Ah placed a hoodoo on yous as well." "I don't think so," I said, smiling. "Whatever," she said, smiling back. "Tea?" "Oh, yeah," I said, reaching into my satchel and pulling out a brown paper bag. "I used some of my pocket money to buy milk and sugar." "Sugar?" she asked, and started rubbing her hands violently together. Thought told you's don't fancy da stuff. It's for me. She took the packet, holding it between two fingers like some smelly diaper. I guess it'll be nice to have my tea with a spot of milk for a change. She walked towards the cabin door. Elvis gonna be real pleased too. A week later, I placed Zombie back on the toy chest before heading off to Pop's with some pocket money. By the time I was chased out, I had a handful of bubble gum and a new Sad Sack comic book. I walked straight into Jim Preston. Well now, if it ain't the teddy bear boy, he sneered. What you got for me, Stone? I arrived home empty-handed and seething. What's wrong? Asked my mother. Nothing, I exclaimed, rushing up to my room. A minute later, she was at my door. It doesn't look like nothing to me. I stared at Zombie intently. Nothing I won't be able to handle. What is that hideous thing doing on top of your toy chest again? She grimaced her displeasure. It seems that you can't make up your mind whether to put him away or keep him on top. I thought you liked Zombie. That is not Zombie. If Zombie had looked like that when I bought him for you, the child welfare would have taken you away from me. That is the resurrected Zombie, new and improved. And maybe I'm Dr. Frankenstein? Why do you say that? Because, she said, jabbing a finger into my ribs and tickling me, I think I may have created a monster. We both giggled. The next morning I stared horrified at Zombie. I wondered if I would ever be able to laugh again. I wrapped the blood-drenched toy in some old newspaper and hid it under the mattress. I would burn it later. I first had to make sure that my worst fears were not true. I washed and dressed for school in record time. It was a prolonged hell waiting for my mother to pack my lunch. You're keen to get to school today? We got an arithmetic test today before recess, and I promised Larry Sewell I'd help him to go over some of the tough stuff before school starts. That's very nice of you. It makes me proud to know you're helping out some of the children that are struggling. As I ran, last night's dream began to disturb my memories. I recalled the vivid images with no little trepidation. Once again, I was viewing the world as if through a sheet of rosy-colored glass, and again, my view was from a very low angle. I traveled along a familiar street with great haste. It was familiar because it was one that I had made a point of avoiding at all costs. It was the street on which Jim Preston lived. I remember hoping to pass the house without being seen. Upon reaching the house, I stopped to gaze up the narrow, polished pathway leading to the door. I tried to run away, but instead found myself moving towards the side of the house. There was a high, thick shrub blocking entrance to the backyard. I began to move with a slight amount of difficulty through the hedgerow. After a short struggle, I found myself emerging on the other side and moving around and onto the back porch. Although my mind was screaming to run in the opposite direction, my body moved with an unerring rapidity towards the back door. The strange thing was that I must have been small enough to fit through the pet flap, because no sooner had I reached it than I immediately found myself inside the darkened house. Without any hesitation, I moved through a kitchen area and then turned right into a long passageway. There was a bedroom at the end. The door was open and a light was on. I stopped at the entrance and, from my point of view, could see a pair of naked feet near the edge of the bed. On the wall, above where the pillows would be, was a picture of Tretyakhov's The Green Lady. There was movement as the person turned the page of a comic book he was reading. It was a Sad Sack comic book. The last thing I remember before waking was moving towards the base of the bed. I don't recall any further dreams that I may have had on that particular night. but I do distinctly remember hearing the sounds of distant sirens before drifting off again. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed the 2 police cars in front of Jim's house. "Why, Jim?" I asked, staring up that same pathway towards the front door. "Why did you have to take my stuff yesterday of all days? You waiting for your pal, fella?" The voice came from behind me. I wheeled to face a policeman. He knelt down and gently held my shoulders. "You'll have to go on alone. He ain't gonna be making it to school today." "Why not? What's wrong?" "Something very bad happened here last night." "What?" I asked, moving back. "What happened?" "I'm not certain. I haven't been inside myself. I've just been told to make sure no one goes inside while the detectives are busy. All I know is that your friend was taken to the military hospital down at the army base." "He's alive?" "Jim's alive. That's all I know. Sorry, fella. It took me the best part of half an hour to reach the hospital." "Grace Preston's boy?" asked the receptionist. "I don't know his mother. Father's Staff Sergeant Frank Preston." The receptionist nodded. "They brought him in very early this morning. His mother's with him now. She's one of our nurses." "Is he all right? Can I see him?" "I'm not sure. You'll have to ask the ward matron." She flipped through some cards before saying, "He's in the pediatric ward, room 2E on the 2nd floor." She pointed towards the elevator. "Your best friend, hey?" I forced an uneasy smile onto my face and pushed the button. There was no one at the ward reception area. I noticed a 2A above the nearest door, so I quickly moved down the passage. As I approached 2E, a lady in a military nurse's uniform exited the room. She closed the door and stood for a moment with her hand over her mouth before bursting into tears. I felt my stomach twist and knot. A moment later, a lady dressed in civilian attire rushed past me. She grabbed the nurse's hands tightly and said, "Oh my, Grace, why didn't you call me sooner? How is he? I got here as quickly as I could." The nurse just shook her head. There was a wooden bench near the corner of the passage. "Sit down. Tell me what happened. You weren't making any sense over the phone." I hastily dashed around the corner where they would not be able to see me. They sat down, and I listened intently as the nurse began to speak. "I had just gotten home from work when it happened. It was late, or very early depending on how you look at it. It was my turn on the midnight shift. Manny, one of the ambulance drivers, dropped me off at about 2:15 maybe. He had just driven off when the shouting started. It was Frank. I couldn't make out everything, but the last thing I did hear him shout was, 'Come on, you commie bastard. I won't go easy.' Then there were shots fired from our bedroom. Many shots. I saw the flashes coming from the window. I was terrified, too scared to go in. Then came those awful screams. I've never heard anyone scream like that before. It turned my blood cold. I was frozen with fear. I just stood there on the sidewalk, not knowing what to do. Then a voice behind me almost made me scream as well. It was Sergeant Ned Granger from next door. He had come to see what all the ruckus was about. He asked if Frank was having another one of his drunken fits. I told him that I thought something was seriously wrong. He returned a short while later with a pistol in his hand. By then the screaming had stopped. He said that he had phoned both the police as well as the MPs. He thought it best to wait until one of them arrived. But I had regained a little courage by then and was concerned about both Frank and Jim. I unlocked the front door, and Ned went in alone. When he came back out, he was as white as a sheet. He threw up on the front lawn. He insisted that it would be best not to go in, that there was a lot of blood. Now, I only wish that I had listened to him. The bedroom. It looked as though someone had used Frank's blood to paint the walls. The civilian lady made exclamations of shock and disgust. I'm a nurse. I've seen some pretty bad things down at the military hospital. I even did a short stint in Korea, but last night, seeing Frank like that, they had taken his, and she made strange gestures with her hands before beginning to sob violently. Her whole body shook, and her words became unintelligible. What about Jim? Asked the lady anxiously. Is James all right? Mrs. Preston slowly regained some of her former composure. She gave her nose a long, hard blow into a large white handkerchief before answering. He's all right. Jim's okay. I felt a great sense of relief flood over me. At least, physically, she added. The police eventually found him hiding in the bathtub behind the shower curtain. He was totally terrified and catatonic at the time. The doctor gave him a sedative to relax him, but when he did eventually say something, it was just all confused babbling. The doctor says that between the drugs and the trauma of his father's death, it's still too early to get any reliable answers. We should wait a while before we try to pressure him for any proper information. It's just so upsetting to hear him scream such foolish nonsense all the time. What sort of nonsense? He keeps saying that a teddy bear came into our house and ripped his father to pieces. A teddy bear? He thinks that a teddy bear could do that to Frank? Yes, a hideous little teddy bear with claws and fangs. And when it had finished, it pointed at him as if to say, "You're next." Good heavens, Grace. Whatever are they putting into the medications these days? The cure is almost as bad as the symptoms. It didn't take me long to figure out what had happened. Staff Sergeant Frank Prescott had taken his son for a haircut at the military base, but had then decided, being a good commie-hating patriot, to have a quick trim himself. When I collected up the sample of Jim's hair from around the barber's chair, I must have somehow gotten a quantity of his father's hair as well. This was a most unfortunate event for Frank Prescott, especially since I disliked him far more than his son. That's right, I hated him enough to wish him dead, just as I had done with Jake. Both were tragic events that I have come to accept as unfortunate accidents. I blame no one for these mishaps, not Nan, not Zami, and most definitely not myself. In fact, and in retrospect, I believe the world to be a much better place during their extended absence. I guessed later that Frank had found and confiscated the comic book from Jim. He had most probably given Jim that promised beating as well. Later that night, the hypocrite was deservedly attacked and killed whilst reading that very same comic book. It was only many years later that I realized, too, the irony of Frank Preston's choice in wall hangings. Then again, the fact that he wasn't too bright had been very obvious. For a commie hater, he had chosen to hang a picture of a Chinese girl above his bed, a Chinese girl that had been painted by a Russian-born artist. I still laugh today when I think about it. That afternoon, after returning home from a most pleasant day at school, I removed Zami from under the mattress. "I'm glad to see you stayed put this time," I said, unwrapping him. During his shampoo, I wondered how I could have ever thought of destroying him. The little tyke had brought so much happiness into my life. Later, after brushing his fur into a lovely, fluffy coat, I sat back to study him. "Hell," I said, starting to chuckle. "You really are an evil-looking critter. Frank Preston must have browned his jammies at the sight of you." I laughed until the tears streamed down my cheeks. "I gotta tell old Nan the good news real soon. Gotta keep my promise to visit her regularly." The next morning I found the Courier, Huma's daily newspaper, on the kitchen table where my mom always placed it for my dad. The newspaper headlines read, Police baffled at man's brutal slaying. They had used the word slaying instead of murder. Did this mean they believed the killing to be done by something not human? I sat down and finished reading through the rest of the article. It told of how both the front and back doors had been locked during the entire incident. Mrs. Prescott had unlocked the front door, and the safety chain on the back door had still been in place. Some of the victim's blood had been found on the small pet flap at the base of the door. To strengthen the possibility that some small feral creature had indeed entered the Prescott home, the police report stated that Frank's rifle had been fired until the clip was empty. The strange thing was that every single shot had been aimed down into the wood-paneled flooring. It was as if he had been trying to shoot at something small and scurrying around the bedroom floor with great speed. The article ended with, "Any information that could help the police in their investigation would be welcome. Contact Inspector Mulholland at the 38th Precinct." Beneath that, some telephone numbers had been given. "I've never known you to be interested in reading the newspaper?" asked my father, sitting down opposite. "I thought you only liked reading those comic books of yours." "Commie comic books? Eh?" "That's what Jim's dad called them. He said they make a person soft." "Ah, of course. Frank's son is in your school. You're reading about the murder. Let's have it. Can I keep the strip section?" "Sure, go ahead." I removed the comic strip section and handed the rest to my dad. He read a little before saying, "Most of the guys at the base couldn't stand his guts, but he couldn't have been all bad." "Why you say that?" "Commie comic books." I could sense him smiling behind the paper. "I kind of thought of him as a germ," I said, starting to read the first strip. "Like something nasty that you might find inside a toilet bowl." The paper flopped forward. My dad had a puzzled yet concerned appearance. "I'm not sure what bad things you heard about Staff Sergeant Preston, but it is not right to talk ill of the dead, so we'll have no more of it. Okay?" "Sure, Dad. Sorry, Dad." "Good," he winked, before returning to the article. Of course, Jim never changed his story. The doctor said that his mind was unable to deal with the terrible reality of what he had actually witnessed that night. Whatever it was, it had forced him to construct a most bizarre tale of the events. "It's a safety barrier to conceal the true horror of what happened," concurred all the specialists. "With time, that truth may eventually reveal itself. But how much time? A month? A year? A decade? A lifetime? The answer to that also remains a mystery." Out of all the uncertainties emerged one most pleasant fact. Jim Preston would never be the same again. Medicine, therapy, and constant visits to a local psychiatrist could not dispel his chronic, morbid, and highly intense fear of any and all teddy bears. Every school kid that had ever been bullied by Jim, and there were plenty, was quick to exploit this fact. The local stores were curious at the sudden increase in the sales of their teddy bears, especially the smaller-sized variety. Isn't it great when the tables are turned? Isn't it wonderful to be able to bully the bully? The teddy bear tied to Jim's school locker was all my own idea, of course. An act of ultimate irony. Even though many of the antagonists were threatened with Friday detention, the reward of seeing a big kid like Jim screaming in absolute terror at a cute, fluffy little teddy bear far exceeded the risk or even the actual reality of the punishment. Hardly a day passed at the school without Jim's screams ringing down the school corridors. It was a fitting and divine justice. It was retribution to the nth degree. Even the headmaster had difficulty concealing his amusement when making a special announcement, requested by the highly distraught widow Prescott to the entire congregated school. He tried to choke his laugh behind a feigned cough, but I had seen the smile on his lips before he placed a clenched fist against them. I had not been the sole person to view that fleeting grin. Muffled giggling was heard, not only from the students, but from some of the staff members as well. One thing was now very obvious. Jim Preston might be well known by all, but boy, he sure was unpopular. With Jake permanently out of the picture, I doubted whether Jim had a single friend left on the entire planet. Also, in trying to help, Mrs. Prescott had only managed to pour more fuel onto the fire. The announcement helped to garner the complete opposite effect of its intended purpose. Now, even more students knew of Jim's peculiar phobia. Children have a habit of being curious to the point of performing acts of extreme cruelty. To illustrate, they will throw a moth into a spider's web just to see what happens. Jim made a most marvelous moth, over and over and over again. His screams became a pleasant part of our daily school life. Jim's mother eventually had him placed in another school, but good news travels fast, especially when someone makes certain of it. It wasn't too long before the teddy bear attacks were renewed at the new school. Eventually, Jim was forced to leave school altogether. Without any decent qualifications and a rather strange disposition regarding certain toys, any future in the American Armed Forces was impossible. I later heard that he had managed to find work in a small supermarket that, most fortunately for him, did not stock toys. I believe his job was to sweep the aisles clean. Yes, sometimes vengeance is sweet, and other times it can be just plain glorious. About a year and a half later, the inevitable happened. My father was once again transferred to a new base. This time, it was way up north, where Christmases felt normal with all the December snowfall. Still, I missed Huma and all the wonderful experiences that I had had. Apart from the time during which I had been constantly bullied, Huma provided some of the best memories from my childhood. I had even managed to make a lot of new friends in our short stay down south, but the best of them all had been old Nan. I remember saying goodbye to her as if it was only yesterday. "I'm gonna miss you most of all, Nan." "Ah, you're just saying that to make an old lady feel good." "No, really, it's the truth." I kissed my pinky and held it in the air. "I wouldn't lie to you. I'm gonna miss coming out here to the Everglades to hear your crazy old stories." Crazy old Nan with her crazy old stories. "I never said you were crazy." She smiled. "Just a little eccentric, maybe?" "Just a little," I said, smiling back. "Eccentric and fascinating." "Oh, so now Oz's sideshow freak is off?" Ignoring the remark, I asked, "Who else comes to visit you out here?" "Oh, mostly just Jonah from Beach and Bayou. He pops in for a visit whenever he be needin' more o' skulls for his shop. Must get plenty lonesome out here. Gonna be worse now that you're going away." I started opening my satchel. "I brought someone to keep you company and to remember me by." I held out Zombie towards her. She stared at the teddy bear for some time before saying, "I haven't seen dat critter in a very long time. Da last time was when yous—" She paused, then solemnly asked, "Yous sure about dis? Ah knows how much you're attached to dat little fella." I nodded. "I'm going to high school soon, and you were right about girls. I'm already starting to feel different about them. I even got me film posters of Voodoo Woman and the 7-year itch on my wall. My mom's still not happy about my choices in wall hangings, but at least my dad doesn't seem to mind now. He was the one using my mom's own words to protect my interests." "Leave him be. It's good for a developing mind, remember? Stimulates the imagination." Nan laughed and took Zombie from me. "Well, in that case, it would be a pleasure to accept him. I'll look after him real good for yous." I know you will. Still, I feel really bad about leaving. Wish there was something I could do. Ain't you're doing young'un, so don't be fretting yourself too much about it. Just be promising old Nan dis. Anything you ask, Nan. If Providence ever bring you back to dis part of the woods, boy, yous be sure to be looking old Nan up, you hear? That's a promise, Nan. That is another promise that I'll surely keep. We hugged, and I felt a tear welling in my eye. If I remember clearly, Nan's eyes were also a little watery that day. My strangest recollection of old Nan was that she seemed younger, much younger on the day I said goodbye than on the day I had first met her. Of course, it was probably just that set of pearly white chompers that she claimed to have gotten from a local dentist around the time of Frank Preston's death. It had been over 25 years since I said goodbye to old Nan. Providence never did see me returning to Houma. Not till late May in 1986, that is. At the time of my return, the New York Giants had done themselves proud in the playoffs and went on to finally defeat the Denver Broncos to win their first league title in 30 years. Top Gun was causing a big stir on the movie circuit. It would become the highest-grossing movie for that year, and also causing a phenomenal boost to the recruitment numbers of both the Air Force and Navy. My father, who had recently retired, thought it was ridiculously far-fetched, and also felt they were placing too much emphasis on the role of women in the military. He often bragged that, since his marriage, my mother had never once supplemented his salary. Sure, they had gone over a few financial bumps along the way, but never anything too serious to handle. Although most of the wives of his friends and colleagues had been forced to find employment outside the home, he had always managed to retain my mother's proud and important title of housewife. My mother was exceptionally bright, and I often wondered if she had ever felt the need to prove herself beyond the kitchen and wash basket. She had developed a malignant brain tumor early in '81, and I never had the opportunity to ask her before her death later that same year. My father wasn't overly disappointed when I joined the police in '69, especially since he knew that I had great ambitions to work in homicide division. I proved myself most capable, and within 3 years, I made detective. 5 years later, when a case came up that required for someone from my office to liaison in person with the Houma division, I volunteered for the assignment. I guess I had found it necessary to force Providence. Of course, old Nan Mangrove would be long gone by now, but I was curious to see how the old neighborhood looked after all these years. Perhaps I might even have the fortune of running into a few old friends. I stopped the hired car on a wide part of the shoulder of the raised highway that crossed the Everglades. It was illegal to stop on the elevated roadway, so I popped the hood, climbed out, and raised it before turning to gaze across the shimmering patches of water towards the old city. It had changed a lot since my youth, but a few familiar landmarks helped me to get my bearings. In the distance, I could see the old Catholic cathedral steeple. Beneath that was the old main road running all the way to my old school. I followed it with my eye until I found it. Behind and to the left of that would be the area where old Nan had stayed. I wasn't surprised, yet still somewhat disappointed, to see a number of high-rise apartments standing whitewashed in the very spot. Some developers had been clever enough to reclaim a portion of the wetland in order to build a rather lucrative investment. The view from the top stories would be rather spectacular. I expected there would be no problem to see all the way to the open bayou. Nan had once told me that she owned that land. If her story was true, then who had inherited the area after her death? If she had left behind no family or will, Then the state would probably have claimed it back after all those years. I looked at my watch. My plane had been delayed, and it was too late now to head down to the precinct. I decided to take a drive into the old town, maybe have an early dinner at one of the places that served some good old southern fare. When I reached the old Houma South Elementary, I noticed the new road that cut towards the bayou. I could see the high-rise apartments and figured the road must lead to them. I was right. I pulled into the visitors' parking area and walked towards the main entrance. I had decided to do a little detective work on my own time. Perhaps I could find the number of an agent or owner who could tell me what had happened to old Nan. Mangrove Heights, I said, reading the name above the entrance. Catchy. I walked inside. There was a large foyer, but entrance beyond that was blocked by a strong metal security gate. To the right of the gate was an intercom, and next to that, on the wall, was a large board that listed the apartment numbers and the names of the occupants. Bingo, I said, walking over to the board. There has to be contact numbers on there. I wrote down the number next to, in case of emergency. It was a long shot, but it was the only telephone number on the board. I was about to leave when my eye caught the name of the occupant listed at 001. No ways, I exclaimed, moving closer. Preston J.F. I shook my head. Can't be the same guy. This place smells of money. I eyed the intercom. Maybe he won the lottery or something. I walked over and studied the device. There was a 3-digit keypad and an enter button. Worth a try, though. Nothing to lose. I keyed in 0, 0, 1, and pushed enter. There was a beeping sound. A few seconds later, a voice said, "Yeah?" I leaned forward. James Frank Preston? There was a short silence before, "Come on in." I walked over to the gate. I pushed on it as it buzzed and it swung open. 001. Has to be the very first apartment. I walked down a short flight of stairs and turned right into a long hallway of doors. As I started to move forward, an elderly man, I guessed in his early 60s, stepped out of the first door. "Yeah?" he asked, looking me up and down. "What you want?" "I'm looking for Jim Preston. I was hoping he may live here." "That would be me, yeah." "Nah, the man I'm looking for is much younger, about my age. You wouldn't happen to know of any other James Preston in Houma?" He shook his head. "Don't know any other Prestons. I got no more family hereabouts or anywhere else. I'm sorry to have bothered you. Good day." I turned to walk off. "Stone?" said the voice behind me. "Theodore Stone?" I turned back towards the old man. "You know me?" "Yeah, thought it was you." He walked back inside. "Come on in. Close the door behind you." I obeyed. There was one of those ridiculous choreographed wrestling matches showing on an old fake wood-paneled television set. He grabbed at a remote, and the picture winked to black. "Want a drink?" He sat down in an old armchair and gestured towards a pine cabinet. There were several bottles of cheap whiskey on top. Half the bottles were empty. "Help yourself. I already got one." He raised the tumbler towards a small refrigerator standing against the living room wall. "There's ice in the freezer compartment." The ice in his glass clinked against the sides. "How do you know me? Do I—" "Get a drink. Sit down." I poured a small shot into a dirty glass I found in the cabinet and sat down. I thought for a minute there, "You gonna tell me you don't drink?" There was the hint of a sneer on his face and in his voice. "At least you seem to have grown into a better man than you were a boy." "I'm sorry?" I asked, frowning. "I know I've changed a lot, Stone, but I would have thought that you'd recognize the guy who kicked your ass every day at school." I stared in disbelief at the wrinkled face. "No, never." He nodded. Jim? He nodded again. It's not possible. You must be you look about 60-something? Yeah. God, what happened to you? You know what happened? You of all people should remember? Of course. I remember about your father and everything else. That was a terrible time, but that doesn't explain this. You, doesn't it? He looked at the drink in his hand. There are certain illnesses that can cause the body to age or deteriorate more rapidly than normal. I've seen pictures of 10-year-olds that look even older than me. He looked at me with a strange intensity. The doctor said that my keeping an awful truth buried inside me all these years is like having a cancer that eats away at your body. Of course, all the medication and alcohol helped as well. Geez, that's terrible, Jim. I'm really sorry. Spare me the bleeding heart. I'm used to it already. And the problem? That thing you have with, you can say it, teddy bears. He took a long swig at his drink. That's what they called me later on, you know, the teddy bear boy. Ain't that ironic? You must have found it pretty hilarious. Why you say that? Because that's what Jake and I used to call you. He stared at the blank television screen. Shit. Poor Jake Dreskel. What a way to go. He stood up and started to pour himself another drink. They never did find that rogue gator, did they? It wasn't any gator that got Jake. Oh? I'm guessing it was the same thing that got my PA. A teddy bear? He ignored the question and opened the refrigerator. What brings you round here? Why you looking for me? What? Oh, I was looking for something else when I saw your name on the board in the foyer. What? I was hoping to find out what happened to an old friend. Anyone I know? You remember Mad Nan? Mad Nan? He pointed his glass into the air. That crazy old black witch who lived way out there in the swamps, all by herself? Actually, she used to stay right here. This apartment block is built right on top of where she used to stay. It is? He became pensive for a moment before saying, Shit, I think you're right. Yeah, you are right. After some more thought, he asked, She was a friend of yours? He laughed rudely before sitting down again. You must have been really hard up for friends? I felt bile rising in my chest and decided to change the subject with a snide remark of my own. How the hell does a loser like you afford to stay in a swank place like this? The last I heard, you were pushing a broom in some dime-a-dozen store. He stared at me and smiled. You're still sore at me after all this time? It's been, 25 years? And you still hate my guts? He shook his head. You gotta learn to let these things go, or they're gonna make you old before your time. He was right. I felt stupid and embarrassed. So, he frowned. This place? You heard right. I'm still pushing a broom at the Lucky 7. I clean the place and bag groceries. It don't pay all that well, but I get enough tips to keep me in booze and smokes. That seemed to remind him that it was time to light up. He held the pack towards me. No thanks, I said, holding up a hand. Tobacco's just too manly for me. He smiled and asked, What about you? What sort of work you do? I'm with Boston Homicide. I'm here on a case. I thought I'd look up a few old friends while I was here. Some fucking policeman you are. That crazy black bitch must have been 100 years old back then already. Only way you're gonna find her is by checking the cemeteries. It was difficult, but I managed to remain composed. I calmly said, I figured as much. Just thought I might get a lead here. Mangrove Heights? Like I told you, she used to stay here. She owned the land under you. He became pensive for a moment, then said, Maybe Jem can help you. Jim? Jem. Owns all the ground floor apartments. Lives 2 doors down. If anybody can help you, it'll be her. Her? Jem's a woman? Nope, he said, blowing smoke into the air. Jem's an angel in disguise. I frowned. You wanted to know how I can afford to stay in a place like this? I nodded. The truth is, I can't. I frowned again. 3 years ago, my mother, bless her heart, passed away. I was still staying with her at the time. The house was one of those military-owned deals, which meant I had to find new digs real soon. Luckily, my mother had managed to leave me some money. Well, actually, it was quite a bit of money. Not enough to afford a swank place like this, but more than enough to be able to drink myself into a stupor every night. Within 2 years, I had used up the money and lost my job. I was living on handouts and sleeping in cardboard boxes in alleys. He held out his wrists towards me. There were scars running the length of his lower arms. I eventually did this to myself with a broken beer bottle. I woke up in a hospital bed at St. Mary's. I didn't know you got black angels, but there was one sitting next to my bed. She was the one who had found me and called the ambulance. After my release, she brought me back here and helped me to clean up my act. Sort of. He held up the glass. Want another? You've been nursing that one forever. I shook my head. She even helped me to get my job back at the Lucky 7. This apartment, he said, waving a hand across the air. This great fucking apartment, she said, had been standing empty for some time and that I could stay here as long as I liked. No charge. Why? I don't know why. She just said that everybody deserves a second chance. I just know that if it wasn't for her, I'd be dead today. Sounds too good to be true. I kid you not. I think I will have that talk with her, I said, standing up and placing the untouched drink on the cabinet. He gazed at it in disgust. 2 doors down, you said? Number 3. Tell my guardian angel I said, hi. The last thing he said before closing the door was, you gotta admit that I helped to keep you on your toes back then. You should thank me. Kept you young and fit, I did. Then he laughed loudly and I felt the bile rising again. I knocked at number 3 and had an attractive black lady, I guessed in her early 40s, open the door. Can I be helping yous? She asked, frowning. Jem? Yep, that be me. Afternoon, I was hoping you would be able to assist me in finding someone. Used to police? Well, actually, yes. I'm with homicide, but this has nothing to do with any official case. I paused before asking, I was wondering if you ever knew a person by the name of Nancy Mangrove. Her eyes blinked rapidly before she asked, Dat crazy old lady dat be stayin' into swamps? Yes, I exclaimed, smiling. Do you know what happened to her? She dead, of course. Died many years ago. I expected as much. Would you know where she was buried? You planning on putting flowers on her grave? Maybe. Yes. Dat be real sweet of yous. She liked them lotus blossoms a lot, you know. I remembered the old weathered gravestone. That's right. How do you... Come on in. She shut the door behind me. The apartment was the exact shape and size as Jim's, but the furnishings were far better. She waved me to a chair and asked, Tea? I don't want to be taking up too much of your time. I just... Hush now, she interrupted. Don't get too many visitors, especially such handsome ones. I felt my face blush. Tea will be fine, I said, sitting down. She disappeared into the kitchen. After some clinking and clanging, she returned. Be ready in a minute. Just needs to draw a little bit more. She sat down opposite me and held out a pack of cigarettes. I declined the offer. Been trying to kick the habit for some time now, she said, lighting up. I know it's bad for ya, but it's one of the vices I'll still be allowin' myself. She gave a wry smile. Don't be tellin' anyone, but I actually prefer to smoke my pipe when nobody's watchin'. Don't want to appear too unladylike, you know. I laughed, but then immediately asked, how come you know about the lotus blossoms? Without hesitation, she said, Nancy Mangrove was my mama. We stared at each other for some time before I said, she told me that she was never married. And yous be right 'bout that fact. My mama never did get round to marryin' me pappy. You are her illegitimate child, also her only child. After a long drag on the cigarette, she said, I'm afraid there ain't no grave for yous to be visitin'. You had her cremated? She shook her head slowly. She just up and disappear one day. Some be tinkin' one of dem gators, dat she always catchin' finally catch her instead. What? I exclaimed in shock. They think an alligator killed her? My thoughts were flooded with the memory of Jake Dreskel. That's awful, Jem nodded. She made her livin' catchin' dem smaller gators for souvenirs and such. Guess one of dem mama gators must have caught her unawares. But we'll never knows the truth, because her body were never found. They did find one of her shoes near her traps, though. I remembered the storm drain. She never ever told me about you. Maybe she was ashamed of dat fact. Well, fancy that. I guess that also explains why you own all the apartments on the ground floor. Who be telling you's dat? Jim Preston. He said to tell you. Hi, Jim? Why you been speaking with dat lowlife? She stood up and walked towards the kitchen. Tea should be ready now. After what Jim had told me, I found Jem's remark shocking. We went to the same school. I shouted towards the kitchen. There was some more clinking and clanging before she returned with 2 delicate china cups and a small milk jug on a silver tray. I decided to be using the good stuff, she said, placing the tray on the coffee table in front of me. There just one problem. Ain't gots me no sugar to be offering yous. Never uses the stuff meself. She rubbed her hands together, as if trying to remove a persistent stain. I immediately noticed the missing digit on each hand. That's all right. Just milk will be fine. Handsome and diplomatic too, she said, adding milk and passing me the cup. To cover my embarrassment, I asked, do you also have the sensing? She glanced down at her hands and said, Jim be tellin' you's the truth. When dem men come with an offer to be buyin' the land in my mama's deed, told them not be wantin' any sort of money. We eventually agree upon dat be ownin' all the ground floor property once the building completed. Dat was my payment. Makes a pretty good livin' by rentin' out the rest. Except for Jim's one, of course. It sounds like a fair deal, but why didn't you push to get something higher up? I'm sure the top floor apartments, with their view of the bayou, must be worth far more. Let me shows you sometime, she said, standing up and beckoning. She moved back towards the kitchen. I quickly followed. She unlocked the back door and walked out into a beautiful garden area of rolling lawns and immaculate flower beds. There was a covered barbecue standing near the door. She waved a hand around. So what do yous think? What'd be better? She pointed towards the top of the building. The view from up there or da one from down here? You've made your point, I said, gazing towards a pond of wild geese and water lilies. And no fire hazard when you light up the barbecue either. Exactly, she exclaimed. Also no stairs to be climbin' when the elevator out of order. I never thought of that, I said, looking up and laughing. How many floors to the top? 12. That's a lot of stairs. You said it. She stared at me intently before pointing at the ground. I gotta be telling you something else about this soil right here. What's that? A secret I never be telling anyone else afore. Yeah? Why me? Because sometime about yous tells me yous can be trusted. Go on. What yous be knowin' about a fella called Ponce de Leon? The guy who discovered Florida? And legend says he discovered Florida while searching for the Fountain of Youth. Well, the truth is, if he had searched a bit more to the west, he may have been successful. What are you saying? The Fountain of Youth is in Louisiana. Uh-huh, sure, I said, not hiding the skepticism in my voice. Well, to be honest, it not be a fountain at all. It actually be something in the soil. Something? It'd be hard to explain. Old Ponce wouldn't have known he had found it even if he was standing right on top of it. It'd take a special person to know. Feel these things. You're talking about the sensing? She nodded. You're trying to tell me that? That's right. At this very moment you're standing on a piece of Eden. But Nan stayed on this land all her life, and it didn't make her any younger? That's not the way it works. Yous be needing some sort of key to be unlocking the power. A catalyst. What sort of catalyst? Something really special. She walked back inside. Come, I'll shows ya. I followed her down the apartment passage. She stopped at a door. This here be the spare room. She turned the knob and pushed the door open. I think you'll be finding some interesting stuff in there. She waited outside while I cautiously entered. Then she followed, flicking on the light switch. I stared in amazement. It was as if the interior of Nan's rickety old single-room cabin had been miraculously transported to this room. The large boiling pot stood as a reminder that the only thing missing was the fireplace with its fire. In the far corner was Red Ned's wooden chest. Seated on top was a very familiar figure. Zombie! I exclaimed, walking over and picking him up. This used to belong to me. It's my old teddy bear. Da catalyst. What? That also be the catalyst I be telling yous about. What on earth are you talking about? Don't be playing the ignorant fool with me. She reached for Zombie. You and I both knows that Zombie ain't no ordinary toy. She stared at the red button eyes. This little critter is quite some fella. Tried to keep him in Red Ned's chest, but he wouldn't have dat at all. Prefers to sit on the top, where he can keep an eye on things. As small as he is, we both knows that he gots the blood of two peoples on his paws and claws. I was about to say something, but she quickly added, Yous remember when Nan told yous dat it be a waste to be killing your enemies? I was dumbfounded, but managed to nod. Do yous remember dat she told you dat there can be some fates that are far worse than death? I nodded again. For the power in the soil to be working, you needs a catalyst, but yous also be needing another human being. Of course, it never be easy to find just the right sort of person. Jim, I exclaimed. Of course. I gave Nan some of his hair all those years ago. Zombie still has some of Jim's hair. I pointed an accusing finger. You're not being kind to Jim at all. That's why he looks the way he does. You need to have him near in order for your magic to work on him. Not at all, she smiled. It would still have effect, even if he were to be on day other sides of Da World. Then why? Because the fool got hisself suicidal tendencies. I can't afford to have him die on me. The result would be disastrous. You already seen what be happening to him when Jake Driscoll and Jim's father were killed. The change is far too rapid. People start asking questions. One day I'm gonna wake up in diapers, and then what am I gonna do? I gotta make sure that man lasts a few more years yet. Nan? I asked. But I had instinctively known all the time that it was her. Is it really you? She smiled two perfect rows of healthy white teeth. It's been a while since anyone be callin' me dat. Oh, hell, Theodore. Ah knows I couldn't be keepin' dis ting secret from yous. Not from a bright homicide detective like yourself. So, it would seem that Providence has eventually brought yous back to visit ol' Nan. Not so old anymore, I smiled back. Hell, you look about 40-ish. There was an uncomfortable hesitation between us, but it soon shattered, and we found ourselves laughing and hugging. How different it was from the time we had said goodbye. I was taller than her now, and she felt strong and firm as her full bosom crushed against my chest. We spent the rest of the afternoon reminiscing about old times. Some tears were shed, but they were all of joy. Nan recalled things that I had all but forgotten. After my second cup of tea, I asked, "Exactly how old are you?" "I was born in 1840, which be meanin', come next August, shall be exactly 146 years old." "Wow," I exclaimed, smiling. "That is amazing. You still got a pretty sharp mind for a 146-year-old. And it be getting even more sharper with every passing day." I became pensive before asking in a serious tone, "Don't you think he's suffered enough?" "Jim?" I nodded. "Yous must be tinkin' dat Nan is a pretty nasty creature for doin' what she doin'. You tinkin' dat be evil puttin' de hoodoo on dat lowlife. Let's not first be forgettin' dat he would 'a' already been worm food if hadn't 'a' pulled him out of the gutter when did. Even helped to give him back some of his dignity. He much happier now Dan he been in a very long time. But the second, and this be the most important reason of all, James Frank Preston is the last of his devilish line. Thank the Lord, above that he never had the fortitude to spread his demon seed. When he breathes his last, then and only then will this world be free of the scourge that was once Robert Preston. Robert Preston, a sugar baron who be building his empire on African blood and sweat. He also be Jim's great-great-grandfather. What's a sugar baron? Suppose you like all the rest, who think that slaves was only used for picking cotton. I nodded. Open your eyes. What yous think be growin' in all them fields around Houma? Of course, sugar cane. That's right. Sugar was, and still is, an even bigger business than cotton. White gold, some called it. And Robert Preston, he owned some of the largest cane fields between Morgan and Houma. He be a sugar baron all right, but there was nothing sweet about that man at all. One of the cruelest men to walk God's earth. Sure, most plantation owners treated their workers harshly, but that was normally only when they failed to meet their quota. Not Robert Preston. He revel in seeing another human being suffer. Hardly a day be passin' without his whip drawing blood. He called African peoples a loathsome race cursed by God. Cain's children, a subspecies of humanity. He often say that he found all blacks to be hideous and despicable. Yet on days when his breath be reekin' of whiskey or gin, he would often tend to be forgettin' that particular view. Yes, many times he forced himself upon the women that he owned. To be emphasizing the evil that he was capable of, he also makes sure that none of the women were ever to be producing his bastard offspring. If ever there was a devil of flesh and blood, then his name was Robert Preston. Da other slaves really happy that be born with them special powers of the sensin'. If not from a medicinal knowledge, many would have perished. When the day come that Preston be trying to force himself upon me, I'll be knocking him senseless with a wooden shovel. Fearing for my life, fled. Managed to remain hidden in the Everglades for quite some time. Over 2 years be passin', and would have managed to avoid being caught until the abolition laws be taken effect. But unfortunately, another runaway who be murdering his foreman be bringing a large group with dogs and determination into the wetlands. The dogs picked up my scent and divided the group. But both groups were being successful that day. They be hanging to one and leaving his corpse to rot. The other day be returning to her master. Ah was beaten within an inch of my life, but that was not enough. Preston had a special punishment for runaways dat he be allowing to live. Can yous be guessing what it was? Do yous know what he be doing to slaves? What had tried to escape from his plantation? I think I do, I said, gazing down sadly at her hands. You do? It's not too difficult to guess. He had their thumbs cut off. Cutting would have been quick and merciful. Robert Preston was not a merciful man. There was a special machine on the plantation for squeezing the sap out of the cane. It was made of two very large metal drums. These cylinders were higher than a grown man and about 3 times as long. Each had been filled with concrete to be given it tremendous weight. They were connected to a large lever through a system of gears. The handle of the lever was large enough to accommodate 3 men standing abreast. Whilst they be turning the lever, others be feeding bundles of cane between them massive cylinders. The juice from the cane would pour down the bottom drum and into a large removable trough. When the container was almost full, it would be replaced with an empty one. The sap was then taken away so that it could be boiled to be removing the excess moisture before being poured into cones and allowed to harden. The finished product was called a sugar loaf, and the peoples used a special pliers called sugar nips for cutting off pieces to be used. It also how that Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil get its name, because it looked like one of them real sugar loaves. Robert Preston was extremely proud of his sugar press. It was a very efficient machine. Hardly a drop of sap remained in the crushed cane that passed out from between them 2 rollers. He had always bragged how wonderful his device was built. Unlike John King's and Major Barrington Butler's steam-driven presses, who had to refeed the crushed cane through the press a second time to avoid unnecessary wastage. Of course, he also be bragging that he wasn't going to have any of them new fangled steam contraptions because he don't want the devil to be finding any idle hands on his plantation. Robert Preston was so proud of his machine that he had even taken to be giving it a name. Old Purgatory, he be calling it. Of course, the name was carefully chosen so as to have a certain significance, for Robert Preston had decreed that all serious sinners be obliged to be spending a night with Old Purgatory, and that was another advantage his machine had over the steam models. It could be turned real slow whenever necessary. That necessity comes soon after my whipping. He turned over the empty trough below them rollers and tells me to be climbing on top. Then he tells me to be putting my thumbs where them 2 big cylinders come together. When I starts crying and begging him, he pulls out his pistol and holds it to my head and say, I don't want to be making more mess than be absolutely necessary. Do yous want to give your fella niggers more work? So I comply, and he tell them to be turning that handle real slow till he say stop. They almost not hear him over my screams, but he stopped them just after my fingernails disappeared between them crushers. Then he told everyone to get out of there and warned them if anyone try to help free me then they gonna suffer the same fate. I never experienced such pain afore in all my life. You's got no idea what it'd be like to feel your bones crushed so flat, and the blood in your fingers forced back until it pop out of your fingers, like a cherry bomb stuck in a overripe tomato. That was pretty bad, but the worst was still to come. I was left alone by the sugar press for about 6 hours. 6 hours what feel more like an eternity. Before he leave, Preston makes sure to be leaving a kerosene lamp burning above me. Not because he think maybe I'd be scared of the dark. Oh no, he know dat lamp and the smell of dat sweet juice on Old Purgatory's rollers gonna be attracting every biting insect within a mile. By that time Preston come back, my hands be swollen to twice their normal size, but I was beginning to get used to the pain by then. But my fear grew when I feels him struggling to climb up behind me, and I smelled a liquor on his breath. I got no more strength in me when he take him from behind, and I be voided my bladder. Da next thing, Preston be shouting and calling me a filthy whore, what try to be contaminating his sugar press. He goes over to dat lever and starts to turn it some more. I somehow still had strength in me to be screaming, as my swollen thumbs were crushed all the way up to where they meet my hands. Then he come over and kicked that truff away so as to leave me hanging there by me 2 digits. Through the haze of pain, I hear him shouting some more as he storm off. How yous expect me to explain the piss on my trousers to my wife? Dat be the last thing I hears for some time. Thankfully at that point, I'll be having the pleasure of losing consciousness at last. When I come to again, I'll be back at the slave quarter in my bed. Scylla, my friend had done a good job of patching 'em up. Luckily for my had taught her well how to help someone with my particular ailments. Luckily too, that the sugar sap on the press be acting as medicine to prevent any serious infection setting in. But being left alone with that smell and that pain for so long makes something snap inside of my head. From that day on, I'd be having a strong aversion towards anything sweet. Yous can imagine the problem for him as well, being a slave working on a sugar plantation. Anyway, I'll be real lucky to be losing just my thumbs and not my hands as well. If that had-o happened, Preston would surely ha' done away with me for good. I could still harvest his damned cane, but it made reaching my quota just that bit more difficult. Luckily, it was not too long thereafter, although it did seem like an eternity in coming at daytime, that the abolition laws were finally enforced. Robert Preston lost his slaves, and when no one be wanting to be working for the white devil, he lose most of everything else too. The only thing he don't be losing was his taste for cheap liquor. I'm so sorry, Nan. That has to be one of the saddest and most frightful accounts of the mistreatment of slaves that I have ever heard. This story ain't over yet, believe it or not, but there be even far worse things for me to be telling yous about Robert Preston. No? Oh yes. She nodded and continued with her narrative. The reason I never fled far enough from Robert Preston when I be having the opportunity was because I had found this special piece of land between the waters of the swamplands. I could feel the power in the soil, but I just never knew how to release it. I never knew how to be construction to catalyst. Robert Preston was the one who would open me eyes to the true power of this piece of land. I returned here as soon as possible after receiving my freedom, but not alone. I was joined by Lucas. He was also one of them what be emancipated from the Preston tyranny. We had always had strong feelings for one another, but had been too afraid to show it openly. We built ourselves a home out here and lived a good and happy life for a while. Then one day, Lucas come back from town with a heavy melancholy. When I be questioning his sorry disposition, he say, we needs to be making our relationship legal. He say the folks in town is frowning upon our fornications. I told him that we already wed in the eyes o' God. Adam and Eve were married in that Garden o' Eden, and they never had no judge or preacher to be making it legal. The first time you ever made love to me, Lucas, I'll be telling him in all earnest, that was when we become one flesh in the eyes o' God. But he insisted that we also need to be married in the eyes o' the law, so that we be keeping good relations with the community. He also say that we needs to be doing it before we gets any new arrivals in the family. It be better for the children's sake too, he say. I guess he was starting to get that primeval urge to be fruitful and preserve the lineage. Of course, having the power o' da sensing, Knew how to safely prevent anything from happening till we was good and ready to increase the family. Anyway, after enough of his fussin' and frettin' about the matter, eventually agreed to be his lawfully wedded. Made myself a white dress, special for da occasion. Nothing too fancy or expensive. Lucas say, look real beautiful in it, but dare sometime missin'. So he go to the bayou early on the wedding day, and he find his honey a real fine-looking corsage. A lotus blossom. Nan smiled and nodded. He bring me a big lotus flower dat he gives me to pin on the front o' my dress. We was all smilin' and jokin' as we walkin' down the main road to the courthouse. Just the two o' us lovebirds. But then we be seein' da one man I hope never to be seen in my whole life again, and he be seein' us too. Robert Preston come out of the general dealer store with his wife and young son. Well, 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 he be sneerin' at us. If it ain't mole slaves Lucas and his nigger whore, Nancy No Thumbs. What be bringin' yous heathens to town? Where yous goin' all dressed up like dat? Trying to be like the white folks, eh? Well, dat dress is the closest yous ever gonna come to bein' white. Yous think our court's gonna recognize your marriage as sometime legal? We'd sooner start marryin' our dogs before we do dat with da likes o' yous. Luke was immediately enraged. He moved forward to confront Preston, but held him back. Leave dat white devil be, told him. One day, he gonna get what comin' ta him. If not in this life, then most, certainly in da next. What you sayin'? Spat Preston. You think maybe God gonna put him in hell? For what? For helpin' Cain's hellspawn to be seen the evil o' their ways? For showin' yous niggers the light? It was Luke's turn to be holding me back. See the light? Shouted. And just how did you do that, Robert Preston? How did any of them poor girls you raped see any light when you beat them? Beat them so bad to make sure no bastard chill o' yours ever see the light? Louise Preston's naturally ashen features became even more pallid. What's she talking about, Robert? She had lamented. Don't be listening to her lies, Louise, he screamed, so dat the spit'll be flying out of his mouth. She just wants to hurt us the only way she able, by smearing the good name of Preston in the dirt. He grabbed his wife's hand. Come, let us be off afore the witch babbles more nonsense. No, shouted, stepping forward. Why you're suddenly in such a rush, Robert Preston? Afraid that your wife and Chill be finding out your true nature? I'm sorry to be giving pigs a bad name, but you're nuttin' but a fat old lecherous swine who couldn't keep his manhood in his pants whenever he reeked of liquor. And dat was more often than not. Look, shouted, pointing at his wife, who had begun to sob bitterly. She know it to be the truth, Robert Preston. She probably always suspected it too, but now she know it for sure. Use heathen cow, he shouted, and give 'em a backhand dat sends me staggerin'. Immediately felt my lip startin' to swell. Any free man who truly loves his woman will not stand by and watch her being beaten. Lucas was no exception. Years of toilin' in decaying fields had forged him into a weapon of spring-steeled muscle and sinew. Afore I knowed it, Robert Preston was lying on his back in the mud, nose all bloody and busted. I almost laughed as Lucas sprang on top of him. He grabbed Preston by his long hair with his left hand and was about to plant a second punch with his right when it happened. My joy was soon to be replaced with an even greater pain than that which had taken away my thumbs. Da pistol seemed to appear almost magically in Preston's hand. There was a crack and a flash. My white dress turned red as the back of Lucas's head exploded. Da bullet had entered through his left eye. A tear welled up in Nan's eye. And so, what was supposed to be a wedding turned out instead to be a funeral. Brought Lucas back here. Ah dug a hole and carved him a gravestone with mown 2 hands. The tear ran down her cheek. What about Preston? I asked concernedly. Surely he must have been tried for murder. Da trial ended, just as Ah had expected it would. Preston was acquitted on DO grounds of self-defense. When he come out at dat courthouse and see me, he give me dat nasty sneering smile dat Ah hates so much. He never say anything, but he sure must have wondered why Ah was smiling even wider and brighter dan him. Why on earth would you smile at Preston's acquittal? After everything he... Nan held up a hand. Because Ah had come to know something that would yet see justice prevail. The court may have acquitted him, but not Nancy Mangrove. Ah would make sure that devil would pay for all of his crimes with his life, or should Ah say with his life essence. On the same day that Ah buried Lucas, a great revelation was laid open to me. As Ah lowered his body into the cold earth, Ah noticed something clutched in his left fist. It be a hank of Robert Preston's hair. As Ah held it in my own hand, kneeling pon that fresh earth from the grave, the sensin' stir some mighty powerful emotions in me. When Ah returned home that evening, after putting da last handful of soil on top of Lucas, Ah was knowing exactly what to be doing. Nan stared at me. One might almost have considered the smile on her face to be somewhat wicked. Carry on, I said impatiently. What did you do? It shouldn't be too difficult for yous to be figuring it out. Robert Preston passed away at the ripe old age of 49. Ah believed the coroner said that the cause of death was old age. He did, after all, appear to be more dat of a man well into his 70s. What now, Nan? What will you do once the last of Robert Preston's line has been removed? Will your hatred be sated? I can't really say. Ah, still got the mental and physical scars to remind me that there are many more Prestons out there. Ah, don't mean Prestons literally, but people like Robert and Frank and Jim, people who got no respect for life or da livin', people who deserve what comin' to them. She stared intently at me. I can help yous too. Ah can do the same for yous, Theodore Stone. It's just a matter of acquiring the proper ingredients. Hell, we can help each other. I don't know, Nan. I shifted uncomfortably. It just doesn't seem very moral. You still be too young now. Maybe one day you'll be changing your mind. One day in the far future, when your body start to feel all them aches and pains, what come with age. Just be remembering that there be plenty Prestons in this world to help yous out. The jails across our beautiful country is full of the likes of garbage like that. Yous is a homicide detective. I'm sure you got no problem getting to meet some of them antisocial types up close, if you knows what I mean, especially the murderers and rapists. Ah, told yous long ago you a bright boy. Look how you handled the problem with both Jake and Jim. Maybe one day, Nan. Maybe one day. I recalled something. It's so ironic. What's that? Jim. Nan frowned. Do you know what he said to me earlier, just before I left his apartment? He claimed that all his bullying was beneficial. He said that it had helped to keep me young and fit. Many a true word spoken in jest. I remember once when I was a kid thinking, sometimes revenge can be sweet. Sometimes it's just plain glorious. I got up. Keep well, Nan. I'll be seeing you around. I walked towards the front door. You's got's my dress and number now, so hopes yous won't go back to becoming a stranger again. Just because we gots ourselves forever don't mean yous should be visitin' old Nan only when yous be needin' her services again. No fear of that, Nan. I'll keep in touch and visit whenever Providence allows. I promise. You always was a man of your word. She smiled. I always liked that about yous. A thought struck me. I wheeled around and said, actually, I could be needing your services sooner than expected. Oh, Yeah, I got me a slave driver for a boss back in Boston. A real bastard who's given me nothing but flack for the past 5 years. Dare your go den. Only one problem with it, though. What be dat? The fucker's as bald as a coot. We stared at each other for a short moment before bursting out laughing. We continued to laugh until tears ran down our cheeks. Our laughter had disturbed the occupant in the main bedroom. A large, fat ginger cat exited to see what all the commotion was about. I noticed that there was small semicircular chunk missing from his left ear. I started to laugh even louder.